In the dense rainforests of Central America, where morning mist clings to towering cecropia trees and howler monkeys call across the canopy, an ancient civilization once thrived. This was not merely another group of people scratching out survival in the wilderness. These were the Maya, builders of one of the most sophisticated societies the ancient world had ever seen. Imagine walking through these same forests 1500 years ago. You would have emerged from green shadows into vast plazas paved with limestone, surrounded by pyramids that rose like artificial mountains toward the sky. The air would have been thick with copal incense, and the sound of drums would have echoed off stone walls covered in intricate carvings. Children would have run between the legs of merchants carrying jade and obsidian from distant lands, while scribes carefully painted glyphs that recorded the movements of planets with mathematical precision. The Maya built cities that housed hundreds of thousands of people. They created books filled with knowledge about astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. They developed a writing system so complex that scholars are still unlocking its secrets today. Their architects designed pyramids that aligned perfectly with celestial events, and their artists carved stone with a delicacy that rivals the finest sculpture of any civilization. Yet when Spanish conquistadors first penetrated these jungles in the 1500s, they found many of the great Maya cities already abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by vines and roots. The plazas that once rang with voices had fallen silent centuries before. Pyramids stood like green hills, their limestone surfaces hidden beneath layers of earth and vegetation. For generations, the outside world knew almost nothing about this vanished civilization. The Maya became a mystery wrapped in jungle shadows, their achievements dismissed or forgotten. But the Maya world was never truly lost. It lived on in the hearts and memories of millions of descendants who continued to speak Maya languages, tend Maya cornfields, and honor Maya traditions. Today we journey into this lost world not as tourists seeking exotic thrills, but as listeners to an ancient story written in stone, painted on bark paper, and preserved in the very landscape itself. We will walk the same paths where Maya kings once processed in feathered regalia, stand in temples where priest astronomers tracked the wandering stars, and touch the same stones that Maya sculptors carved with infinite patience and skill. This is not a story of a dead civilization, but of a living culture that continues to surprise us with its depth, its beauty, and its wisdom. Come, let us begin our journey beneath the jungle canopy, where the past and present dance together in the filtered green light of the rainforest. Long before the great pyramids of Tikal pierced the jungle canopy, long before the scribes of Palenque carved their elegant glyphs into stone, the story of the Maya began in simple villages scattered across the forests and highlands of what we now call Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador. Picture these early settlements around 4,000 years ago, small clusters of thatched houses arranged around modest plazas where families gathered each evening as cooking fires sent thin columns of smoke into the tropical twilight. These were farming people, descendants of ancient wanderers who had learned to coax sustenance from the challenging landscape of Mesoamerica. They cleared patches of forest with stone axes, planted kernels of an early form of corn called teosinte, and watched the rains nurture their crops. The women shaped clay into vessels for storing water and grain, while the men carved tools from obsidian and flint. Children played with rubber balls made from the latex of sapodilla trees, unknowingly practicing a game that would one day become a sacred ritual played in stone courts before thousands of spectators. But even in these humble beginnings, something special was stirring. The Maya were not content merely to survive. They looked up at the wheeling stars and began to notice patterns. They observed that certain celestial events coincided with the best times to plant and harvest. They started to mark time not just by the passing of days and seasons, but by the complex dance of planets and constellations across the night sky. This curiosity about the heavens would eventually lead them to create one of the most accurate calendar systems ever devised by human minds. Around 2000 BCE, these scattered villages began to grow and prosper. The cultivation of maize, beans, and squash provided a reliable food surplus that freed some people from the daily demands of farming. These individuals could specialize in other pursuits, crafting pottery, weaving textiles, working jade and obsidian, or serving as priests and leaders. With specialization came trade, and with trade came contact with other developing civilizations across Mesoamerica. To the west, in the humid coastal plains along the Gulf of Mexico, another remarkable people called the Olmec were creating Mesoamerica's first great civilization. The Olmec built massive ceremonial centers dominated by earth and clay pyramids. They carved enormous stone heads weighing many tons, depicting rulers with stern expressions and elaborate headdresses. Most importantly for the Maya story, they developed many of the fundamental concepts that would later flower in Maya civilization: the ritual ball game, the use of jade as a sacred material, the practice of bloodletting ceremonies, and possibly even the earliest forms of Mesoamerican writing and calendars. As Olmec traders ventured eastward along rivers and jungle paths, they brought with them not just exotic goods but revolutionary ideas. Maya communities along trade routes absorbed these influences and transformed them, adding their own innovations and insights. The exchange was not one-sided. Maya artisans had already mastered the working of jade, a stone so hard that it could only be shaped with patient grinding using sand and water. Maya farmers had developed sophisticated techniques for managing water in both the rainy and dry seasons, creating systems of canals, reservoirs, and terraced fields that would later support massive urban populations. By 1000 BCE, the transformation was becoming visible across the Maya landscape. Villages were growing into towns, and some towns were developing into centers that archaeologists now call ceremonial complexes. These were not yet true cities, but they were much more than simple farming communities. They featured raised platforms supporting buildings made of cut stone rather than perishable materials. Plazas were paved with smooth limestone plaster that gleamed white under the tropical sun. Most significantly, these centers began to feature pyramidal structures that served as platforms for temples dedicated to the gods who controlled rain, fertility, and the movements of celestial bodies. The earliest of these ceremonial centers appeared in the northern regions of Maya territory, in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula and northern Guatemala. Sites like Nakbe and El Mirador began to rise from the forest floor, their builders moving massive quantities of limestone blocks without the aid of metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or beasts of burden. Every stone was shaped with obsidian blades and wooden wedges, then carried to its destination on the backs of human laborers walking along stone causeways that connected different parts of these growing complexes. At El Mirador, Maya architects achieved something truly extraordinary for its time. They constructed pyramid complexes that rivaled anything being built elsewhere in the world during the same period. The largest pyramid at El Mirador, known today as La Danta, rises over 200 feet above the surrounding jungle, making it taller than many of the pyramids of Egypt's Old Kingdom. But unlike the Egyptian pyramids, which were built as tombs for individual pharaohs, the Maya pyramids served as platforms for temples where entire communities could gather for ceremonies that connected earthly affairs with cosmic rhythms. The construction of these monuments required not just massive labor forces, but sophisticated knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and mathematics. Maya architects had to understand principles of weight distribution to prevent their structures from sinking into the soft limestone bedrock of the Patane region. They had to calculate precise angles and alignments to ensure that their temples would capture specific astronomical phenomena. Most remarkably, they had to coordinate the efforts of thousands of workers over periods spanning multiple generations, suggesting the presence of stable political institutions and shared religious beliefs that could inspire such long-term commitment. As these ceremonial centers grew in size and complexity, they began to function as more than just religious sites. They became focal points for regional trade networks, attracting merchants from hundreds of miles away. Market days would see plazas filled with vendors displaying shells from distant coasts, obsidian blades from highland volcanoes, jade ornaments, colorful feathers from tropical birds, cacao beans, salt, textiles, and countless other goods. The wealth generated by this trade allowed Maya leaders to commission increasingly elaborate architectural projects and artistic works. But perhaps more importantly, these growing centers became laboratories for cultural innovation. Scribes experimented with systems of writing, gradually developing the glyphic script that would eventually become the most sophisticated writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas. Astronomers built observatories and refined their understanding of planetary cycles, laying the foundation for the incredibly accurate Maya calendar. Artists perfected techniques for carving stone and painting murals that would later adorn the greatest Maya cities. Musicians and poets created the songs and stories that celebrated Maya mythology and history. By the beginning of the Common Era, the transformation was complete. What had begun as simple farming villages had evolved into a network of city-states connected by trade routes, shared religious beliefs, and increasingly sophisticated cultural institutions. The stage was set for what archaeologists call the classic period of Maya civilization, when the descendants of those early farmers would create some of the most magnificent cities and most profound intellectual achievements of the ancient world. Yet even as we marvel at this transformation, we must remember that it did not happen overnight. The rise of Maya civilization was a gradual process that unfolded over more than 2 millennia, shaped by countless individual decisions and innovations, environmental challenges and opportunities, cultural exchanges, and creative adaptations. It was a story written not by kings and conquerors alone, but by farmers and potters, traders and astronomers, parents and children, all contributing their talents and dreams to the great collective project of Maya civilization. The daily life of these early Maya communities reveals the deep connections between practical necessity and spiritual understanding that would characterize Maya civilization for centuries to come. In the pre-dawn darkness, before the howler monkeys began their territorial calls, Maya farmers would already be walking to their fields, following paths worn smooth by countless generations of feet. They carried simple tools, wooden digging sticks hardened in fire, stone axes for clearing brush, and gourds for carrying water. But they also carried something less tangible and far more precious, an intimate knowledge of their environment that had been passed down through countless generations. These early Maya understood that the forest was not an obstacle to be conquered, but a partner to be worked with. They practiced what we now call forest gardening, creating diverse plots that mimicked the natural structure of the jungle while producing food for human consumption. Under the canopy of fruit trees like ramon and chicozapote, they planted corn, beans, and squash in combinations that enriched the soil naturally. Between these food plants, they cultivated medicinal herbs, spices, and materials for making textiles and tools. This system was so sustainable that it could support families for generations without depleting the land. Women played crucial roles in these early communities, not just as mothers and wives, but as keepers of essential knowledge. They were the primary healers, maintaining detailed understanding of which plants could cure illness, ease pain during childbirth, or treat wounds. They were also the master potters, creating vessels that were both functional and beautiful, decorated with patterns that told stories or invoked the protection of benevolent spirits. Most importantly, they were often the primary teachers of children, passing on the oral traditions that preserved Maya history, mythology, and practical wisdom. The spiritual life of these early Maya communities was already rich and complex, centered around the belief that all aspects of the natural world possessed souls or spirits that could influence human affairs. The corn plant was not merely a source of food, but a sacred being whose life cycle mirrored the journey of human souls through death and rebirth. The saber tree, with its massive trunk and towering canopy, was seen as the axis that connected the underworld, the earthly realm, and the heavens. Caves, with their mysterious depths and echoing chambers, were viewed as portals to the realm of the ancestors and the gods. Rain was perhaps the most important spiritual concern for these agricultural peoples. In a land where the difference between prosperity and famine often depended on the timing and intensity of seasonal rains, the gods who controlled precipitation were among the most revered deities. Chak, the Maya rain god, was already being honored in simple ceremonies conducted in forest clearings and beside natural springs. These early rituals involved offerings of corn, honey, and copal incense, accompanied by prayers and dances designed to ensure the continued favor of the rain-bringing spirits. As the centuries passed and these communities grew larger and more prosperous, their spiritual practices became more elaborate and formalized. Simple offerings evolved into complex ceremonies conducted by specialist priests who devoted their lives to maintaining proper relationships with the divine realm. Temporary altars made of wood and thatch were replaced by permanent stone structures that could serve as focal points for community worship. These developments laid the foundation for the magnificent temples and elaborate rituals that would later characterize classic Maya civilization. The influence of Olmec civilization on these developing Maya communities cannot be overstated. Olmec traders did not simply arrive with exotic goods, they brought revolutionary concepts that transformed Maya thinking about leadership, religion, and the organization of society. The Olmec had developed the concept of divine kingship, the idea that certain individuals possessed supernatural powers that allowed them to communicate with gods and ancestors. This concept would become central to Maya political organization, leading to the emergence of powerful ruler priests who claimed cosmic authority over their subjects. Equally important was the Olmec contribution to Maya artistic and intellectual development. Olmec artisans had mastered techniques for working with jade, a material so hard that shaping it required incredible patience and skill. They had also developed sophisticated systems of iconography, using symbolic images to convey complex religious and political messages. Maya artists absorbed these techniques and symbols, then transformed them according to their own aesthetic sensibilities and cultural needs. The adoption of the Mesoamerican ball game provides a perfect example of how the Maya transformed Olmec influences into something distinctly their own. The Olmec had developed this game as a ritual activity that symbolized the cosmic struggle between opposing forces, light and darkness, life and death, order and chaos. Maya communities embraced the game enthusiastically, but they modified its meaning and practice to reflect their own religious beliefs and social structures. Over time, the Maya ball game would become far more than a sport. It would serve as a form of divination, a method of resolving disputes, and a ritual reenactment of mythological events. Archaeological evidence from sites like Nakbe and El Mirador reveals the remarkable speed with which Maya civilization developed once these foundational elements were in place. At Nakbe, Maya builders were constructing substantial stone platforms and pyramidal structures by 800 BCE. These early monuments may seem modest compared to the towering pyramids that would later dominate sites like Tikal and Calakmul, but they represent a revolutionary development in Maya society. The ability to organize large-scale construction projects required new forms of leadership, new systems of resource management, and new ways of motivating people to work together toward common goals. The builders of Nakbe faced enormous challenges. Every limestone block had to be quarried using stone tools, shaped with obsidian blades, and transported to the construction site using only human labor. The precise fitting of stones required mathematical knowledge and engineering skill that was passed down through generations of master builders. Most remarkably, these projects were undertaken by communities that had no written records to preserve technical knowledge, no metal tools to ease the work, and no domesticated animals to help with transportation. The successful completion of these monuments testifies to the remarkable organizational capabilities and shared sense of purpose that characterized early Maya society. By the time El Mirador reached its peak around 400 BCE, Maya architects had achieved something truly extraordinary. The site covered over 6 square miles and included pyramid complexes that were among the largest structures built anywhere in the ancient world during that period. The La Danta complex alone contains over 99 million cubic feet of construction fill, making it one of the most massive architectural achievements of the pre-Columbian Americas. Yet El Mirador was not unique. It was part of a network of increasingly sophisticated ceremonial centers that were transforming the Maya landscape. These monumental construction projects served multiple purposes that went far beyond mere displays of power or religious devotion. They functioned as massive public works programs that provided employment for thousands of people during the agricultural off-season. They created focal points for regional trade networks, attracting merchants and artisans from across Mesoamerica. Most importantly, they served as schools where knowledge was preserved and transmitted from one generation to the next. Young people working on these projects learned not just construction techniques, but also astronomy, mathematics, writing, and the complex protocols of religious ceremony. In the soft light of dawn breaking over the jungle canopy, we can almost hear the echoes of those ancient voices. The calls of merchants announcing their wares in bustling marketplaces, the chants of priests conducting ceremonies atop newly built pyramids, the laughter of children playing in plazas that their grandchildren would see transformed into the hearts of magnificent cities. We can imagine the satisfaction of master builders surveying their completed works, knowing that they had created structures that would endure for millennia. We can sense the excitement of young scribes learning to paint their first glyphs, unaware that they were participating in the development of one of humanity's most sophisticated writing systems. This was the beginning of the Maya story, but it was only the beginning. The foundations had been laid for a civilization that would produce some of the greatest achievements in human history: cities of breathtaking beauty, scientific discoveries of remarkable accuracy, and artistic works of enduring power. The simple farming villages of 4,000 years ago had given birth to a cultural tradition that would flourish for over 2 millennia and continues to inspire wonder and admiration today. As the first light of dawn touches the limestone towers of Tikal, filtering through morning mist that rises from the jungle floor, we witness one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements emerging from green shadows. These are not merely buildings scattered through the forest, but the carefully planned components of a true city, a metropolis that once housed over 100,000 souls in the heart of what seemed like endless wilderness. To understand the magnitude of Maya architectural achievement, we must first imagine the challenge these builders faced. Unlike the civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, who built their cities on open plains with rivers for transportation, the Maya chose to create their urban centers in the middle of dense tropical rainforest. Every stone had to be quarried from the living bedrock, shaped without metal tools, and carried through jungle paths to construction sites that might be miles away. Every decision about where to place a building, how tall to make a pyramid, or which direction a plaza should face required intimate knowledge of the local environment, the movement of water during rainy and dry seasons, and the complex cycles of celestial bodies. The master architects of the classic period Maya, working between 200 and 900 CE, developed solutions to these challenges that were both practical and profoundly beautiful. They understood that successful cities in the tropical lowlands required careful management of water resources. During the 4-month rainy season, torrential downpours could turn plazas into lakes and cause poorly designed structures to collapse. During the 8-month dry season, communities needed reliable sources of drinking water and irrigation for their crops. Maya engineers responded to these challenges by designing cities that were essentially enormous water management systems disguised as ceremonial centers. The great plazas that served as gathering places for religious ceremonies were actually sophisticated catchment areas, their surfaces carefully sloped and plastered to channel rainwater into underground cisterns called chultans. These bottle-shaped chambers, carved deep into the limestone bedrock and lined with waterproof plaster, could store thousands of gallons of fresh water. In some cities, networks of stone channels and aqueducts carried water from distant springs and seasonal streams to supply urban populations throughout the year. The pyramidal temples that dominated these cities served purposes far beyond religious ceremony, though their spiritual significance cannot be understated. Each pyramid was positioned according to precise astronomical calculations, aligned to capture specific celestial events that were crucial to Maya religious and agricultural cycles. The Great Pyramid at El Castillo in Chichen Itza, for example, was designed so that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the afternoon sun creates the shadow of a serpent descending its northern staircase. This was not mere architectural showmanship, but a vital calendar system that helped Maya farmers know exactly when to plant and harvest their crops. These pyramids also functioned as artificial mountains, recreating in stone the sacred peaks where Maya mythology placed the homes of the gods. The temples at their summits were not large spaces intended for congregational worship, but intimate chambers where priest-kings could communicate privately with divine forces. The real religious drama took place on the broad staircases and in the plazas below, where thousands of people could gather to witness ceremonies that connected earthly affairs with cosmic rhythms. Maya architects achieved remarkable feats of engineering in constructing these monuments. The Pyramid of the Great Plaza at Tikal rises over 200 feet above the surrounding forest. making it taller than a modern 20-story building. Yet it was built entirely without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or beasts of burden. Every limestone block was shaped with obsidian blades and stone hammers, then carried up wooden ramps and stone staircases by teams of workers whose coordination and skill rivaled those of any construction crew in history. The construction techniques developed by Maya builders were ingeniously adapted to local conditions and available materials. They discovered that limestone, when heated in kilns fired with hardwood, could be transformed into a cement that was both waterproof and incredibly durable. This lime mortar allowed them to create structures that have withstood over 1,000 years of tropical storms, earthquakes, and the relentless pressure of tree roots without losing their structural integrity. Maya architects also developed a sophisticated understanding of acoustics that they incorporated into the design of their plazas and temples. At sites like Chichen Itza and Palenque, the arrangement of buildings creates natural amphitheaters where a speaker standing at the base of a pyramid can be heard clearly by thousands of people scattered across a plaza. Handclaps made at certain positions produce echoes that sound like the calls of the sacred Quetzal bird, transforming simple plazas into spaces where human voices could seemingly invoke responses from the gods themselves. The residential architecture of Maya cities reveals equally sophisticated planning and engineering. Rather than cramming people into crowded tenements, Maya urban planners created neighborhoods of family compounds scattered throughout the urban area and connected by raised stone causeways called sacbeyob. These causeways, some of which stretched for dozens of miles between cities, were marvels of engineering in their own right. They were built with carefully graded foundations that provided drainage during the rainy season, surfaced with white limestone plaster that reflected moonlight for nighttime travel, and elevated above the surrounding terrain to remain passable even during floods. The family compounds served by these causeways were not simple houses but complex arrangements of buildings surrounding private courtyards. Wealthy families might have compounds that included separate structures for sleeping, cooking, storage, workshops, and religious activities, all arranged around courtyards that served as outdoor living spaces and centers of family life. Even modest compounds typically included raised platforms that kept living areas above flood levels, private wells or access to communal water sources, and small shrines where families could honor their ancestors and household gods. The workshops scattered throughout Maya cities reveal the incredible diversity of specialized crafts that supported urban life. Obsidian knappers produced razor-sharp blades and delicate ornaments from volcanic glass imported from highland quarries hundreds of miles away. Jade carvers created intricate ornaments and ceremonial objects from stone so hard that shaping it required months of patient grinding with sand and water. Featherworkers fashioned elaborate headdresses and cloaks from the brilliant plumage of tropical birds, creating garments of such beauty that they were reserved for gods and kings. Textile production was perhaps the most important craft in Maya cities, providing not just clothing but also a medium of exchange that functioned like currency. Maya weavers, primarily women, created fabrics of extraordinary complexity and beauty using techniques that required years to master. They cultivated cotton in urban gardens, collected dyes from insects, plants, and minerals, and wove patterns that told stories, identified social status, and invoked divine protection. The most skilled weavers could create textiles so fine that Spanish conquistadors compared them favorably to the finest silks of Europe. The ball courts found in virtually every Maya city deserve special attention as masterpieces of both architecture and symbolic design. These long, narrow courts flanked by sloping walls were not simply sports facilities but sacred spaces where cosmic dramas were enacted through ritual games. The courts were typically aligned along north-south axes and positioned at the centers of cities, emphasizing their importance in Maya urban planning. The largest ball court at Chichen Itza stretches over 500 feet in length and features walls that rise nearly 30 feet above the playing surface, creating an enclosed space with remarkable acoustic properties. Maya cities also featured specialized buildings that served unique functions in urban life. Palaces, multi-story complexes with dozens of rooms arranged around courtyards, housed royal families, and served as administrative centers where the complex business of governing was conducted. Observatories, often built as circular towers with precisely positioned windows, allowed Maya astronomers to track the movements of planets and stars with accuracy that would not be surpassed until the invention of the telescope. Steam baths, low stone structures with carefully engineered heating systems, provided spaces for ritual purification and medical treatments. The urban planning of Maya cities reveals a sophisticated understanding of how to create livable environments in challenging tropical conditions. Rather than concentrating all activities in dense urban cores, Maya planners distributed different functions throughout extensive urban areas that blended seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Markets were positioned at convenient intersections of causeways. Ceremonial centers occupied elevated positions that commanded views of the surrounding landscape. Residential areas were scattered through zones where the forest canopy provided natural air conditioning and where kitchen gardens could supplement food supplies. Water management systems in these cities were nothing short of ingenious. At Palenque, Maya engineers constructed elaborate networks of stone channels that diverted streams away from buildings while providing running water for palaces and temples. At Tikal, enormous reservoirs lined with waterproof plaster collected rainwater from paved surfaces throughout the city, creating reliable water supplies that could sustain large populations through extended dry seasons. These systems required constant maintenance and sophisticated management, but they allowed Maya cities to flourish in environments where other civilizations might have struggled to survive. The artistic program of Maya cities transformed functional architecture into spaces of transcendent beauty. Every visible surface was an opportunity for artistic expression. Facade sculptures turned plain walls into narratives that told the stories of gods and kings. Colorful murals painted on interior walls transported viewers into mythological realms populated by supernatural beings and cosmic forces. Even utilitarian objects like water vessels and storage containers were decorated with images that connected daily life to sacred stories. Perhaps most remarkably, Maya cities were designed to evolve and grow over time. Unlike modern cities that are planned according to fixed master plans, Maya urban centers were conceived as living entities that could adapt to changing needs and circumstances. Buildings were regularly renovated, expanded, or completely rebuilt according to astronomical cycles, political changes, or religious requirements. This flexibility allowed Maya cities to remain vital and relevant for centuries, constantly renewing themselves while maintaining their essential character and function. Standing today in the restored plazas of Tikal or Palenque, watching sunrise light slowly illuminate limestone facades still bearing traces of ancient paint, we can begin to appreciate the vision and skill of the Maya architects who created these urban masterpieces. They built not just for their own time but for eternity, creating spaces that continue to inspire wonder and admiration over a millennium after their builders laid down their tools. These cities of stone remain as testimony to human creativity, ingenuity, and the enduring power of architectural beauty to move the human spirit. In the darkness before dawn, when the jungle lies silent except for the gentle rustle of leaves in the night breeze, Maya astronomers would climb the steep stone steps of their observatory towers to greet the morning star. Venus, which they called No-Ek, or the Great Star, was not merely a bright point of light in the sky but a powerful deity whose movements across the heavens determined the fate of kings and the success of military campaigns. These patient watchers of the sky had discovered that Venus follows a precise cycle, disappearing for 8 days in superior conjunction with the Sun, then reappearing as the morning star for 263 days before vanishing again for 50 days and returning as the evening star for another 263 days. This level of astronomical precision was not achieved overnight or by casual observation. It required generations of dedicated sky watchers who recorded their observations on bark paper books, carved them into stone monuments, and passed their knowledge down through carefully trained apprentices. Maya astronomy was not a purely academic pursuit, but an essential technology for survival in a world where the timing of agricultural activities, religious ceremonies, and political decisions could mean the difference between prosperity and disaster. The Maya understanding of celestial mechanics was rooted in their fundamental belief that the cosmos was a living entity, inhabited by gods and spirits whose movements influenced every aspect of earthly existence. The sun was not simply a ball of fire that provided light and heat, but the heroic deity Kinich Ahau, who died each evening as he descended into the underworld and was reborn each morning after defeating the Lords of Darkness. The moon was the beautiful goddess Ixchel, patron of weaving, medicine, and childbirth, whose changing phases mirrored the cycles of feminine fertility and the rhythms of agricultural seasons. To track these divine movements with the precision required for practical use, Maya astronomers developed observational techniques that would not be surpassed until the invention of the telescope. At sites like Caracol at Chichen Itza, they built circular towers with windows positioned at specific angles to frame important astronomical events. These windows functioned like giant gun sights, allowing observers to note precisely when celestial bodies appeared at crucial positions in their cycles. The Caracol Observatory contains windows aligned to track the extreme positions of Venus during its 8-year cycle, the rising and setting points of the Moon during its 18 6/10 year cycle, and various positions of stars and planets that were significant in Maya religious practice. At Copan, Maya astronomers created one of the most sophisticated astronomical instruments of the ancient world. On the eastern edge of the city, they constructed a series of stone markers arranged to create a giant observatory that could track the movement of the sun throughout the year with incredible precision. From a specific observation point in the main plaza, these markers allowed astronomers to determine the exact dates of the solstices and equinoxes, as well as the 2 days each year when the sun passes directly overhead at Copan's latitude. This information was crucial for determining the proper timing of agricultural activities and religious ceremonies. The mathematical underpinnings of Maya astronomy reveal a level of sophistication that rivals any ancient civilization. Maya mathematicians had independently developed the concept of zero, a revolutionary idea that allowed them to perform complex calculations and express very large numbers with elegant efficiency. Their vigesimal or base 20 counting system was perfectly adapted to astronomical calculations, allowing them to track cycles that spanned thousands of years with remarkable accuracy. The Maya calendar system, built on this mathematical foundation, was perhaps their greatest intellectual achievement. Unlike our simple solar calendar, which tracks only the Earth's orbit around the Sun, the Maya created multiple interlocking calendars that simultaneously tracked the movements of the Sun, Moon, Venus, Mars, and other celestial bodies. The sacred calendar, or Tzolkin, combined 13 numbers with 20-day names to create a cycle of 260 days that governed religious activities and personal destiny. The solar calendar, or Hab, tracked the 365 and 1/4 day cycle of the seasons with remarkable precision. These two calendars meshed together like gears in a cosmic clockwork, creating a larger cycle called the calendar round that lasted 52 years. Every day in this cycle had a unique combination of positions in both calendars, creating a system for dating events that was both precise and deeply meaningful in religious terms. But even this sophisticated system was not sufficient for Maya needs. They also developed the long count, a linear calendar that could track dates across thousands of years, allowing them to record historical events and predict future astronomical phenomena with unprecedented accuracy. The Venus tables recorded in the Dresden Codex, one of only 4 surviving Maya books, demonstrate the incredible precision of Maya astronomical observation. These tables predict the movements of Venus over centuries with an accuracy that was not matched by European astronomers until well into the Renaissance. Maya astronomers had discovered that 5 Venus cycles of 584 days each equal exactly 8 solar years of 365 days, each 65 days, a relationship that allowed them to predict Venus positions decades in advance. This astronomical knowledge was not merely academic, but had profound practical applications in Maya society. Venus was considered the patron deity of warfare, and Maya kings would not launch military campaigns during periods when Venus was not visible in the sky. The heliacal rising of Venus, when it first appears as the morning star after its period of invisibility, was considered an especially auspicious time for beginning wars or conducting important ceremonies. The elaborate carved monuments called stelae that grace Maya cities often record the astronomical conditions at the time of important historical events, linking earthly affairs to cosmic cycles. Maya astronomers also tracked the movements of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, though with less precision than their observations of Venus and the Moon. They were particularly interested in periods when multiple planets appeared close together in the sky, viewing these conjunctions as times of special spiritual significance when the barriers between the earthly and divine realms became permeable. During such periods, Maya priests would conduct elaborate ceremonies designed to harness the concentrated spiritual energy of aligned planets. The lunar calendar held special significance for Maya women and for agricultural planning. Maya astronomers had discovered that the moon's synodic period, the time from one new moon to the next, averages 29.53 thousandths days. They created tables that could predict lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, viewing these events as times when the moon goddess was being devoured by celestial demons and required the intervention of human prayers and ceremonies to restore her to health. Solar eclipses were regarded with even greater awe and apprehension. Maya astronomers could predict these events years in advance, but their occurrence was still viewed as a cosmic catastrophe requiring immediate ritual response. During eclipses, entire communities would gather in the great plazas of their cities to participate in ceremonies designed to help the sun god defeat the demons of darkness and restore light to the world. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge of the Maya was preserved and transmitted through multiple channels. The most skilled astronomers were typically members of the royal court or high-ranking priests who had access to specialized training and the bark paper books where astronomical tables were recorded. But basic astronomical knowledge was also embedded in the agricultural calendar and religious festivals that governed daily life for ordinary people. Farmers learned to plant corn when certain stars appeared in specific positions, while craftspeople timed their most important work to coincide with favorable celestial conditions. Maya astronomical knowledge was also encoded in their architecture in ways that made celestial cycles visible to entire communities. The Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza was designed so that during the equinoxes, the afternoon sun creates the shadow of a feathered serpent descending the northern staircase. This spectacular light show attracted thousands of pilgrims and served as a public demonstration of the priest's ability to predict and understand cosmic cycles. Similar astronomical alignments can be found in Maya buildings throughout Mesoamerica, transforming entire cities into three-dimensional calendars that marked important dates in both solar and Venus cycles. The Group E complexes found at many Maya sites represent another form of architectural astronomy. These arrangements of three buildings on the eastern side of a plaza, viewed from a pyramid on the western side, were designed to track the annual movement of the sunrise along the horizon. On the winter solstice, the sun rises behind the northern building. On the summer solstice, it rises behind the southern building, and on the equinoxes, it rises directly behind the central building. These complexes allowed entire communities to participate in tracking the solar year without requiring specialized astronomical knowledge. Perhaps most remarkably, Maya astronomers were able to calculate the length of the solar year with extraordinary precision. The Palenque Palace tablet records a calculation that places the tropical year at 365 and 2,420 thousandths days, which is accurate to within 14 seconds of the true value as determined by modern science. This level of precision required not just careful observation but sophisticated mathematical techniques for analyzing astronomical data over extended periods. The decline of Maya civilization in many areas during the 9th century CE led to the loss of much astronomical knowledge, but significant traditions survived in the northern Yucatan and highland Guatemala. When Spanish missionaries arrived in the 16th century, they found Maya priests still maintaining accurate calendars and conducting ceremonies timed to celestial events. Unfortunately, the Spanish viewed these practices as pagan superstitions and systematically destroyed the books and trained specialists who preserved this ancient wisdom. Today, as we stand beneath the same stars that guided Maya astronomers over a millennium ago, we can appreciate both the scientific achievement and the spiritual vision that motivated their patient observations. They saw in the wheeling constellations not mere points of light, but a cosmic drama in which human beings played essential roles. Their astronomical knowledge was never separated from their understanding of the sacred, creating a science that was both rigorously empirical and deeply meaningful in spiritual terms. In the pre-dawn darkness of the jungle, When Venus rises like a brilliant jewel above the eastern horizon, we can almost hear the whispered prayers of Maya astronomers greeting the return of their beloved morning star. They knew, as we are only beginning to rediscover, that human beings are not separate from the cosmos, but integral parts of a vast, interconnected system in which the movements of the stars reflect and influence the rhythms of life on Earth. In the quiet workshops of Palenque, where filtered sunlight streams through doorways carved in living limestone, Maya scribes once sat cross-legged on woven mats, their obsidian brushes poised above sheets of bark paper smooth as silk. Before them lay small ceramic pots filled with pigments ground from minerals and plants, carbon black from charred pine, red ochre from iron-rich clay, blue from precious azurite traded from distant mountains, and yellow from the dried bodies of tiny insects that fed on certain cacti. These scribes were not merely clerks recording mundane transactions, but artists, historians, and guardians of knowledge whose elegant hieroglyphs would preserve the voices of kings and gods for future generations to decipher. The Maya writing system represents one of humanity's most remarkable intellectual achievements, a fully developed script capable of recording any thought or sound in the Maya language with precision and beauty. Unlike the simple pictographs used by many ancient peoples, Maya hieroglyphs combined logographic symbols that represented entire words or concepts with phonetic signs that recorded the sounds of syllables. This hybrid system gave Maya scribes extraordinary flexibility, allowing them to write the same word in multiple ways and to play with puns, wordplay, and layers of meaning that transformed their texts into works of literary art as well as historical records. The development of Maya writing was a gradual process that unfolded over many centuries. The earliest known Maya hieroglyphs appear on stone monuments dating to the 3rd century BCE, but these early inscriptions are limited to simple calendrical notations and the names of rulers. By the beginning of the Classic period, around 200 CE, Maya scribes had developed a sophisticated script capable of recording complex historical narratives, religious texts, and astronomical calculations. The golden age of Maya writing flourished between 600 and 800 CE, when scribes at sites like Palenque, Copan, and Quirigua created some of the most elegant and complex texts ever produced in the ancient Americas. Learning to read and write Maya hieroglyphs required years of intensive training that was available only to members of the elite classes. Young scribes began their education by memorizing hundreds of hieroglyphic signs and their various meanings. They practiced drawing glyphs on pottery sherds and pieces of bark paper, learning the precise proportions and artistic conventions that distinguished professional calligraphy from crude scratches. Advanced students studied the historical and mythological texts that formed the foundation of Maya literature, learning not just how to read the glyphs but how to interpret their deeper meanings and cultural significance. The tools of Maya scribal work were simple but required considerable skill to use effectively. Brushes were made from human hair or plant fibers bound to thin wooden or bone handles. The finest brushes, used for detailed work on ceremonial texts, might contain only a few hairs and could create lines as thin as modern mechanical pencils. Scribes prepared their own inks and paints from carefully guarded recipes that were passed down through scribal families like precious heirlooms. The bark paper on which they wrote was made from the inner bark of fig trees, processed through a complex procedure of soaking, beating, and pressing that produced a writing surface of exceptional quality. Maya scribes wrote on a variety of materials depending on the importance and intended permanence of their texts. The most precious books were painted on bark paper and bound with wooden covers decorated with jade and feathers. These codices contained the most important religious and astronomical knowledge of Maya civilization, including tables for predicting eclipses, calendrical calculations spanning thousands of years, and mythological narratives that explained the creation of the world and the adventures of the gods. Sadly, only 4 of these precious books survived the Spanish conquest, preserving just a tiny fraction of what was once a vast library of Maya literature. For permanent records of historical events and royal achievements, Maya scribes carved their texts directly into stone monuments. The limestone used for these inscriptions was relatively soft when first quarried, allowing skilled carvers to create hieroglyphs of remarkable delicacy and artistic beauty. These stone texts were often painted in bright colors that made them visible from great distances, transforming Maya cities into vast outdoor libraries where the deeds of kings and gods were proclaimed to all who could read their elegant script. The content of Maya texts reveals a civilization deeply concerned with history, astronomy, and the proper relationships between human beings and divine forces. Royal inscriptions typically begin with elaborate calendrical notations that precisely date the events being described, often correlating multiple calendar systems to create temporal frameworks of extraordinary precision. These texts then proceed to narrate the births, accessions, marriages, conquests, and deaths of rulers, weaving individual biographies into larger patterns of dynastic succession and cosmic significance. Maya scribes were masters of literary technique, employing sophisticated devices like parallel structure, alliteration, and metaphorical language to create texts that were both informative and aesthetically pleasing. They developed conventional phrases and formulaic expressions that allowed readers to quickly identify different types of information, while also creating opportunities for wordplay and artistic variation. A typical royal inscription might describe a king as the sacred lord of the place of split sky, a metaphorical reference to the city's location that also evoked mythological associations with the creation of the world. The historical information preserved in Maya texts has revolutionized our understanding of ancient Mesoamerican civilization. Before scholars learned to read Maya hieroglyphs, the Maya were often portrayed as peaceful astronomers and mathematicians who lived in harmony with nature and each other. The decipherment of Maya texts revealed a very different reality, a world of powerful kingdoms engaged in complex diplomatic relationships, trade networks spanning hundreds of miles, and frequent warfare that shaped the political landscape of ancient Mesoamerica. The breakthrough in Maya decipherment came in the mid-20th century through the combined efforts of scholars from many different countries and disciplines. The Russian linguist Yuri Knorosov made crucial early contributions by recognizing that many Maya glyphs represented syllabic sounds rather than complete words. His work built on earlier discoveries by scholars like Ernst Fürstemann, who had decoded the mathematical and calendrical portions of Maya texts, and Tatiana Proskuryakov, who proved that Maya inscriptions recorded historical events rather than purely astronomical or religious information. The process of decipherment accelerated dramatically in the 1970s and 80s as scholars developed new methods for analyzing Maya texts and gained access to better photographs and drawings of inscriptions. Workshops attended by epigraphers, linguists, art historians, and archaeologists became forums for collaborative problem-solving, where specialists could share insights and test new theories about the meaning of undeciphered glyphs. The decipherment of Maya writing became a truly international effort, with scholars from Guatemala, Mexico, the United States, Russia, Germany, and many other countries contributing crucial discoveries. Today, approximately 80% of Maya hieroglyphs can be read with confidence, allowing scholars to reconstruct detailed histories of Maya kingdoms and to understand the religious and philosophical concepts that guided Maya civilization. The texts reveal that Maya scribes were not just recorders of information, but creative artists who took pride in their literary achievements. They sometimes signed their works, included personal observations and opinions, and even engaged in friendly competition with scribes from other cities to see who could create the most elegant or clever inscriptions. The subject matter of Maya texts was remarkably diverse, encompassing everything from astronomical tables and mathematical calculations to epic poems and intimate personal letters. Religious texts described the adventures of gods and heroes, provided instructions for conducting ceremonies, and explained the mythological foundations of royal authority. Historical texts recorded the complex relationships between different Maya kingdoms, including alliances, conquests, royal marriages, and diplomatic exchanges. Administrative texts documented tribute payments, trade agreements, and legal decisions that governed daily life in Maya cities. Maya scribes also created texts that we might classify as scientific literature, recording observations of astronomical phenomena, medical treatments, and agricultural techniques. The Dresden Codex contains detailed tables for predicting the movements of Venus and the occurrence of solar eclipses, demonstrating a level of astronomical sophistication that was not matched in Europe until the Renaissance. Other texts describe herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and diagnostic techniques that formed the basis of Maya medical practice. The artistic aspect of Maya writing cannot be separated from its communicative function. Maya scribes viewed their glyphs as visual compositions that needed to be aesthetically pleasing as well as informative. They developed hundreds of variant forms for common signs, allowing them to choose the most artistically appropriate version for each context. They arranged their glyphs in elegant cartouches and decorative frames that transformed simple texts into works of visual art. Most remarkably, they often incorporated the meaning of their texts into the visual design of their glyphs, creating calligraphy that was simultaneously writing and illustration. The training of Maya scribes involved not just learning to read and write, but also mastering the complex cultural knowledge necessary to create meaningful texts. Scribes needed to understand genealogies of royal families spanning many generations, the mythological associations of different gods and heroes, the proper procedures for conducting religious ceremonies, and the astronomical knowledge necessary to calculate accurate dates and predict celestial events. This made scribes among the most educated and culturally sophisticated members of Maya society, trusted advisors to kings and guardians of the intellectual traditions that defined Maya civilization. The Spanish conquest of the Maya lands in the 16th century brought this scribal tradition to an abrupt and tragic end. Spanish missionaries viewed Maya books as works of the devil and systematically destroyed them in public ceremonies. Bishop Diego de Landa, the most notorious destroyer of Maya literature, boasted of burning 27 Maya books at a single auto da fe in the town of Mani in 1562. In a cruel irony, the same Diego de Landa later wrote one of our most important sources of information about Maya culture, but his efforts at preservation could not compensate for the irreplaceable knowledge lost in his campaign of destruction. Despite this cultural catastrophe, the tradition of Maya writing did not disappear entirely. In highland Guatemala and parts of the Yucatan, Maya scribes continued to write using a modified version of their ancient script well into the colonial period. They created new types of texts that blended traditional Maya knowledge with European influences, producing works like the Popol Vuh and the books of Chilambalam that preserve invaluable information about Maya mythology, history, and prophetic traditions. Today, as we sit in libraries and museums examining photographs of Maya inscriptions, we can appreciate both the intellectual achievement and the artistic beauty of this remarkable writing system. Each glyph represents not just information, but also the skill, creativity, and cultural knowledge of the scribe who created it. In their elegant hieroglyphs, Maya scribes succeeded in capturing something that eludes most writing systems. They made the act of reading a visual as well as intellectual pleasure, creating texts that speak to both the mind and the eye with equal eloquence. In the flickering light of copal torches as dawn approaches over the sacred city of Palenque, a Maya king prepares for one of the most solemn rituals of his reign. Dressed in jade ornaments that catch the torchlight like captured starfire, wearing a headdress of brilliant quetzal feathers that seem to shimmer with their own inner light, he climbs the steep steps of the Temple of the Cross. In his hands, he carries an obsidian blade so sharp it can cut through bone without effort, and a stingray spine polished smooth by generations of royal hands. Today, he will offer his own blood to the gods, piercing his tongue and genitals in a ritual that connects his mortal flesh to the cosmic forces that govern the universe. This scene, recreated from countless Maya inscriptions and artistic depictions, reveals the profound spiritual intensity that lay at the heart of Maya civilization. To understand the Maya, we must understand their gods. For every aspect of Maya life was shaped by religious beliefs that saw the divine presence in everything from the corn growing in their fields to the planets wheeling overhead in the night sky. Maya religion was not a separate compartment of life, but the fundamental framework through which they interpreted all experience, from the most intimate personal moments to the grand ceremonies that marked the passage of cosmic time. The Maya pantheon was vast and complex, populated by hundreds of deities who governed every aspect of existence. At the pinnacle of this divine hierarchy stood Itzamna, the supreme creator god whose name means iguana house, and who was envisioned as an ancient sage whose wisdom encompassed all knowledge. Itzamna was credited with inventing writing, establishing the calendar, and teaching humanity the arts of civilization. He was often depicted as an elderly man with a prominent nose and filed teeth, seated in the cosmic tree that connected the three levels of the universe. Perhaps no deity was more important to daily Maya life than the corn god, known by various names but most commonly called Hun Hunappu or One Hunappu. Corn was not merely food to the Maya, but the very substance from which human beings were created, according to their sacred book, the Popol Vuh. The corn god was typically portrayed as a beautiful young man with an elongated skull that mimicked the shape of a corn cob, often shown emerging from the earth like a sprouting plant or dancing in supernatural realms populated by other gods and spirits. The rain god Chak held equally crucial importance in Maya religious life, for in a land where agricultural success depended entirely on seasonal rains, the deity who controlled precipitation was literally a matter of life and death. Chak was actually a group of 4 gods, each associated with a different direction and color: white Chak of the north, red Chak of the east, black Chak of the west, and yellow Chak of the south. They were typically depicted with reptilian features, prominent fangs, and streaming tears that represented the rain they brought to thirsty crops. The sun god, Kinich Ahau, embodied the heroic principle of light conquering darkness that was central to Maya cosmology. Each day he journeyed across the sky in his divine palanquin, battling the forces of the underworld that sought to prevent his passage. Each night, he descended into Xibalba, the Maya underworld, where he fought supernatural beings and underwent trials that paralleled the mythological adventures described in the Popol Vuh. His eventual triumph each dawn represented the victory of order over chaos, life over death, and knowledge over ignorance. The moon goddess Ixchel presided over the feminine aspects of creation, governing childbirth, weaving, medicine, and the cycles of fertility that sustained both human society and the natural world. She was often depicted as either a beautiful young woman associated with the crescent moon or as an aged crone connected with the destructive aspects of lunar power. Maya women especially revered Ixchel, seeking her protection during pregnancy and childbirth, and honoring her in the intricate textiles they wove with patterns that told mythological stories. Maya religious practice centered around the concept of reciprocity between human beings and divine forces. The gods had created humanity and continued to sustain the world through their constant efforts, but they required nourishment and acknowledgement from their human creations in return. This divine hunger was satisfied through offerings that ranged from simple gifts of food and flowers to elaborate ceremonies involving music, dance, incense, and the most precious substance of all, human blood. Blood sacrifice was central to Maya religious practice because blood was understood to contain the life force that animated all living beings. When offered to the gods, blood provided them with the spiritual energy they needed to continue their cosmic labors. Maya kings and nobles regularly performed auto-sacrificial rituals, piercing their tongues, earlobes, and genitals with obsidian blades, stingray spines, and sharp bones. The blood was collected on bark paper, which was then burned so that the smoke could carry this precious offering to the divine realm. These bloodletting rituals were not acts of self-torture but profound spiritual experiences that transformed participants and allowed them to communicate directly with supernatural forces. The pain and blood loss induced altered states of consciousness in which Maya nobles experienced visions of gods, ancestors, and mythological beings. These visions were considered essential for royal legitimacy, as they provided divine guidance for important decisions and confirmed that the ruler maintained proper relationships with cosmic forces. The most elaborate bloodletting ceremonies took place during important calendrical events and royal celebrations. The dedication of new temples, the accession of kings, and the celebration of calendar endings were marked by rituals in which entire royal courts participated in coordinated acts of sacrifice. These ceremonies could last for days, involving hundreds of participants who created cascades of blood that were understood to renew the cosmic order and ensure the continued prosperity of the kingdom. Human sacrifice, while less common than auto-sacrifice, played crucial roles in the most important Maya ceremonies. Captive warriors taken in battle were especially prized as sacrificial victims because their warrior status made them particularly valuable offerings to the gods. The sacrifice of captives served multiple purposes. It provided nourishment for divine forces, demonstrated the power and piety of Maya rulers, and symbolically reenacted mythological events in which gods and heroes conquered their enemies. The ballgame that was played in courts throughout the Maya world was intimately connected with themes of sacrifice and cosmic renewal. The game itself represented the struggle between opposing forces that maintained the balance of the universe, and its conclusion often involved the ritual sacrifice of players. Contrary to popular misconceptions, it was not necessarily the losing team that was sacrificed. Maya inscriptions suggest that in some contexts the winners were chosen for this honor, as their victory demonstrated their worthiness to serve as messengers to the gods. Maya concepts of the afterlife were complex and varied depending on the manner of death and the spiritual preparation of the deceased. Warriors who died in battle and women who died in childbirth were believed to join the sun god in his daily journey across the sky, eventually becoming part of his divine retinue. Most people, however, faced a more challenging journey through the underworld of Xibalba, where they had to overcome trials and obstacles before reaching their final destinations in the cosmic order. The underworld itself was conceived as a watery realm beneath the earth, populated by gods and demons who tested the souls of the dead through various ordeals. The hero twins of Maya mythology, Hunahpu and Xbalanca, had successfully navigated these trials and emerged victorious, providing a model for human souls seeking to overcome the challenges of death. The elaborate tomb of the great king Pakal at Palenque was designed as a symbolic recreation of this mythological journey, with architectural features that guided the deceased ruler through the stages of his transformation into a divine being. Maya priests served as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, conducting the complex ceremonies that maintained cosmic harmony. They underwent years of training that included learning to read hieroglyphic texts, memorizing astronomical tables, mastering ritual procedures, and developing the spiritual discipline necessary to communicate with supernatural forces. The highest-ranking priests were often members of royal families, combining religious authority with political power in ways that made them among the most influential figures in Maya society. The training of Maya priests involved learning an extensive corpus of mythological knowledge that provided the foundation for ritual practice. They memorized creation stories that explained how the gods had formed the world through repeated acts of creation and destruction, eventually fashioning human beings from corn dough mixed with divine blood. They studied the adventures of culture heroes who had established the patterns of proper behavior and the consequences of violating cosmic law. Most importantly, they learned the intricate relationships between earthly events and celestial cycles that allowed them to determine the most auspicious times for conducting important ceremonies. Maya religious architecture created sacred spaces that facilitated communication between human and divine realms. Temples were conceived as artificial mountains that replicated the cosmic peaks where gods resided, while their interior chambers served as caves that provided access to the underworld. The elaborate sculptural programs that decorated these buildings told mythological stories and proclaimed the divine authority of the rulers who commissioned them, transforming entire cities into three-dimensional religious texts that could be read by anyone familiar with Maya iconographic conventions. Caves held special significance in Maya religious practice as natural portals to the underworld and places where the boundaries between different cosmic realms became permeable. Maya priests conducted important ceremonies in caves throughout their territory, leaving offerings of pottery, jade, and other precious materials that have been preserved for over a millennium. Some caves were modified with architectural features that enhanced their ritual function, including altars, drainage systems, and sculptural decorations that transformed natural spaces into formal temples. The calendar itself was a religious document that revealed the divine forces governing each day and the appropriate rituals for maintaining cosmic harmony. Each day in the Maya calendar was ruled by specific gods and associated with particular types of activities that were considered auspicious or dangerous. Maya priests consulted elaborate calendrical tables to determine the best times for planting crops, conducting trade, waging war, or performing life cycle ceremonies like naming children or celebrating marriages. Maya concepts of divine kingship were central to their political organization and religious practice. Kings were not merely secular rulers, but sacred beings who served as intermediaries between their subjects and the cosmic forces that governed the universe. Royal blood was considered especially potent in religious ceremonies, and the personal participation of kings in bloodletting rituals was essential for maintaining the spiritual health of their kingdoms. This sacred character of kingship meant that the death or incapacity of a ruler could precipitate both political and spiritual crises that threatened the stability of entire regions. The elaborate costumes worn by Maya rulers during religious ceremonies transformed them into living representations of gods and mythological beings. Feathered headdresses identified kings with celestial birds that served as messengers between earth and sky. Jade ornaments connected them with the precious green stone that symbolized water, vegetation, and the life force itself. Masks and other regalia allowed rulers to assume the identities of specific deities during ceremonies, becoming temporary vessels for divine power that blessed their subjects and renewed the cosmic order. As we stand today in the ruins of Maya temples, watching sunrise light illuminate carved facades still bearing traces of ancient pigments, we can begin to appreciate the profound spiritual vision that motivated Maya religious practice. They saw themselves not as separate from the divine, but as active participants in a cosmic drama where human actions had consequences that rippled throughout the universe. Their rituals were not empty formalities, but technologies for maintaining the balance of forces that sustained all life, performed with a sincerity and devotion that continues to inspire wonder and respect over a millennium after their great temples fell silent. Along the ancient roads that wind through the jungle from Tikal to Calakmul, through highland passes that connect the Maya lowlands with the volcanic peaks of Guatemala, and down rivers that flow from the mountains to the Caribbean coast, Maya merchants once traveled with precious cargoes that connected scattered communities into a vast network of exchange. Picture these traders setting out before dawn, their backs bent under the weight of woven packs filled with jade ornaments, obsidian blades, colorful feathers, bags of cacao beans, and countless other treasures that would travel hundreds of miles from their places of origin to reach eager buyers in distant markets. These merchant expeditions were not simple commercial ventures, but complex undertakings that required diplomatic skills, geographical knowledge, astronomical timing, and spiritual preparation. Maya traders needed to know not just the physical routes between cities, but also the political relationships between rulers, the seasonal patterns of rainfall and flooding that affected travel conditions, and the calendrical cycles that determined when markets would be held and when certain types of goods would be in greatest demand. The foundation of Maya trade networks was the incredible diversity of resources available within their territory and the specialized knowledge required to extract and process these materials. The dense tropical forests of the Petén region provided hardwoods like mahogany and cecropia that were prized for construction and canoe making, as well as exotic products like jaguar skins, bright feathers from tropical birds, and copal resin that was essential for religious ceremonies. The coastal areas supplied salt, shells, fish, and pearls that were traded far inland to communities that had no access to marine resources. Perhaps no commodity was more important to Maya trade than obsidian, the volcanic glass that could be knapped into blades sharper than modern surgical instruments. The major obsidian sources were located in the highlands of Guatemala and Mexico, at volcanic sites like El Chayal and Ixtepeque, where Maya craftsmen had perfected techniques for quarrying and processing this precious material. Obsidian blades were essential tools for everything from harvesting crops to conducting religious ceremonies, making them one of the most widely traded commodities in the Maya world. The processing of obsidian required specialized knowledge that was carefully guarded by master craftsmen who passed their techniques down through family lineages. These artisans could create dozens of razor-sharp blades from a single obsidian core using pressure flaking techniques that required years to master. The finest obsidian work produced ceremonial objects of breathtaking beauty, mirrors polished to perfect smoothness, eccentric flints carved into fantastic shapes representing gods and mythological beings, and ritual blades with handles decorated in jade and precious woods. Jade held even greater value in Maya society than obsidian, despite being much more difficult to work and far rarer in nature. The sources of jade in Mesoamerica were limited to a few locations in Guatemala and Mexico, making this green stone one of the most precious materials in the Maya world. Jade was not valued primarily for its beauty, though Maya craftsmen created ornaments of extraordinary elegance from this hard stone, but for its spiritual significance as a symbol of water, vegetation, and the life force itself. Working jade required immense patience and skill, as the stone was too hard to be carved with metal tools and had to be shaped through grinding with sand and water over periods that could last months. Maya jade workers developed techniques for drilling tiny holes through jade beads using hollow bird bones and abrasive powder, creating jewelry so delicate that modern jewelers struggle to replicate their achievements. The most prized jade ornaments were worn by kings and buried with them in their tombs, where they were believed to help preserve the royal soul for its journey through the underworld. Cacao beans served as both a luxury food item and a form of currency throughout the Maya world, creating trade networks that connected chocolate-growing regions with urban centers, where this precious commodity was consumed in elaborate ceremonies. Maya nobles drank chocolate from beautifully painted ceramic vessels, often adding spices like chili peppers and vanilla to create beverages that were considered both delicious and spiritually potent. The preparation and consumption of chocolate was surrounded by ritual protocols that reflected its sacred status as the food of gods and kings. The cacao trade was particularly complex because the trees that produced chocolate beans could only grow in specific environmental conditions found in limited areas of the Maya territory. This created opportunities for communities in cacao-growing regions to develop specialized economic relationships with urban centers that lacked access to this precious commodity. Maya merchants who controlled cacao trade routes could accumulate enormous wealth and influence, becoming powerful figures in the political networks that connected different Maya kingdoms. Feathers from tropical birds created another major category of trade goods that connected diverse ecological zones throughout Mesoamerica. The brilliant green feathers of the quetzal bird, found only in the cloud forests of highland Guatemala, were among the most prized materials in the Maya world, reserved for the costumes of kings and the decoration of religious objects. Maya traders traveled dangerous mountain paths to reach quetzal habitats, where they established relationships with local hunters who could capture these elusive birds without damaging their precious plumage. The feather trade required not just knowledge of where different bird species could be found, but also understanding of their behavior patterns, breeding cycles, and the techniques needed to preserve their plumage during long journeys to distant markets. Maya feather workers developed sophisticated methods for cleaning, dyeing, and arranging feathers into elaborate costumes and decorations that transformed their wearers into living representations of gods and supernatural beings. Salt production and trade created some of the most extensive commercial networks in the Maya world, connecting coastal salt-making centers with inland communities that had no access to this essential commodity. Maya salt producers developed innovative techniques for extracting salt from seawater using ceramic vessels and controlled evaporation, creating a product that was not just useful for food preservation and preparation, but also served important roles in religious ceremonies and medical treatments. The salt trade routes that connected coastal production centers with inland markets became highways for the exchange of many other commodities and ideas. Salt merchants often carried other goods on their regular trading expeditions, creating opportunities for communities along trade routes to access exotic materials and foreign technologies. These same routes served as channels for the transmission of artistic styles, religious concepts, and technological innovations that helped create the shared cultural traditions that unified diverse Maya communities. Textiles represented perhaps the most important trade commodity in terms of daily life, as Maya weavers created fabrics that served not just as clothing but as indicators of social status, ethnic identity, and regional affiliation. Maya women were the primary textile producers, using techniques passed down through generations of mothers and daughters to create fabrics of extraordinary complexity and beauty. The finest Maya textiles required months to complete and incorporated materials like cotton, agave fibers, and exotic dyes that had to be obtained through trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. The dyeing of textiles created specialized trade relationships between Maya communities and the sources of colorants like cochineal insects, indigo plants, and mineral pigments. Maya dyers developed secret techniques for creating colors that would not fade over time, producing textiles that remained vibrant for decades or even centuries. The most prized textile dyes, like the purple produced from murex shells found only along certain coastal areas, were so valuable that they were reserved for royal garments and religious vestments. Maya trade networks also facilitated the exchange of technological innovations and artistic styles that helped create the shared cultural traditions that characterized classic period civilization. Potters learned new techniques for creating ceramic vessels of different shapes and decorative styles. Architects borrowed design elements from distant cities and adapted them to local conditions and preferences. Scribes exchanged knowledge about new developments in hieroglyphic writing and calendar calculation. These cultural exchanges helped create the sense of shared identity that allowed Maya communities to maintain diplomatic and commercial relationships despite being organized into independent and often competing political units. The relationship between Maya trade networks and the great city of Teotihuacan in central Mexico represents one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Mesoamerican commerce. Teotihuacan was not a Maya city, but the capital of a different civilization that controlled the Valley of Mexico between 100 and 600 CE. Despite the distance and cultural differences separating Teotihuacan from Maya territory, extensive trade relationships developed between these civilizations that profoundly influenced Maya art, architecture, and religious practice. Teotihuacan merchants established trading colonies in Maya cities like Tikal and Copan, bringing with them new technologies, artistic styles, and religious concepts that were absorbed and transformed by Maya artists and intellectuals. The influence of Teotihuacan can be seen in Maya architecture, where certain building styles and decorative motifs reflect central Mexican rather than local traditions. Maya pottery from this period shows clear Teotihuacan influences in both form and decoration, suggesting that Maya potters were learning new techniques from foreign craftsmen or adapting foreign designs to local tastes. The collapse of Teotihuacan around 600 CE created opportunities for Maya merchants to expand their own trade networks and establish direct relationships with communities that had previously been under Teotihuacan influence. This expansion of Maya commercial reach contributed to the flowering of classic period civilization, as increased wealth from trade allowed Maya rulers to commission the great architectural projects and artistic works that represent the pinnacle of their cultural achievement. Later connections with Toltec civilization, centered at the city of Tula in central Mexico, brought new waves of foreign influence to the Maya world during the post-classic period. Toltec merchants and possibly military adventurers established themselves at sites like Chichen Itza, where they introduced new architectural styles, religious practices, and artistic conventions that blended with traditional Maya culture to create distinctive hybrid traditions. The maritime trade networks that connected Maya coastal communities with Caribbean islands and Central American societies represent another dimension of Maya commercial activity that is only beginning to be understood by modern scholars. Maya seafarers used large dugout canoes to navigate coastal waters and venture into the open ocean, establishing trade relationships with communities in Honduras, Nicaragua, and possibly even more distant locations. These maritime expeditions required sophisticated knowledge of ocean currents, weather patterns, and celestial navigation techniques that allowed Maya traders to find their way across hundreds of miles of open water. Archaeological evidence from Maya coastal sites reveals the presence of materials and artifacts that could only have arrived through long-distance maritime trade. Metals like copper and gold, which were not available in Maya territory, appear in Maya sites in forms that suggest they were obtained through trade with South American societies that had developed sophisticated metallurgical technologies. Similarly, certain types of jade and other precious stones found in Maya sites appear to have originated in locations far from traditional Maya trade routes. suggesting that Maya merchants had access to exchange networks that spanned much of the Americas. The decline of classic period Maya civilization in many areas during the 9th century CE disrupted but did not eliminate the trade networks that had connected Maya communities for centuries. In the northern Yucatan and other regions where Maya civilization continued to flourish, merchants adapted to changing political conditions by developing new trade routes and establishing relationships with emerging powers. The great post-classic trading center of Mayapan became a focal point for commercial networks that connected the Yucatan Peninsula with central Mexico and Central America, maintaining the tradition of long-distance trade that had been central to Maya civilization for over a millennium. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered Maya merchants in the early 16th century, they were impressed by the sophistication of their commercial operations and the quality of the goods they carried. These late Maya traders were still using many of the same routes and techniques that their ancestors had developed centuries earlier, testament to the enduring effectiveness of the commercial systems that had helped sustain Maya civilization through periods of both prosperity and crisis. Standing today at the ruins of ancient Maya marketplaces, where stone platforms once supported wooden stalls filled with exotic goods from across Mesoamerica, we can imagine the sounds and smells of these bustling commercial centers. The calls of merchants advertising their wares in multiple languages, the rustle of feathers and textiles being examined by potential buyers, the clink of jade ornaments and obsidian blades being traded for cacao beans and salt. These markets were not just places of economic exchange, but centers of cultural interaction where ideas, technologies, and artistic innovations spread throughout the Maya world, creating the networks of connection that helped sustain one of humanity's most remarkable civilizations. In the pre-dawn darkness of a jungle morning in 736 CE, warriors from the great city of Calakmul move silently through the forest paths that lead toward their ancient rival Tikal. Their bodies are painted with designs that invoke the protection of war gods, their weapons blessed in ceremonies conducted by priest warriors who have consulted the movements of Venus to determine the most auspicious time for battle. At their head walks a king whose very name, Yuknom Chin, means shaker of cities, a ruler whose ambitions have already brought dozens of Maya communities under the dominance of what Spanish scribes would later call the Kingdom of the Snake. This scene, reconstructed from Maya hieroglyphic texts carved in stone monuments throughout the Petén region, reveals an aspect of Maya civilization that contradicts romantic notions of peaceful astronomer priests living in harmony with nature. The Maya were not pacifists, but a warrior culture whose kings gained legitimacy through successful military campaigns and whose cities rose and fell according to their ability to dominate their neighbors through combinations of diplomatic skill, economic pressure, and naked military force. Maya warfare was not random violence but a sophisticated political institution governed by complex rules, seasonal patterns, and religious protocols that connected earthly conflicts with cosmic struggles between gods and supernatural forces. Wars were typically declared during periods when Venus was visible as the morning star, as this planet was considered the patron deity of warfare and conquest. Maya kings would not launch major military campaigns during times when Venus was invisible or when other astronomical conditions were considered inauspicious for martial activities. The weapons of Maya warfare were elegant and deadly, crafted by specialists who combined practical effectiveness with artistic beauty in tools designed for both combat and ceremony. Maya warriors carried spears tipped with obsidian points that could penetrate the quilted cotton armor worn by enemy fighters. They wielded clubs embedded with obsidian blades that could inflict devastating wounds, and slings that could hurl stones with lethal accuracy. Most prestigious were the elaborate staffs and axes that served as symbols of rank and spiritual power as well as weapons of war. The development of Maya military technology was closely connected to their sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mathematics. Maya engineers designed defensive systems that took advantage of natural terrain features while incorporating astronomical alignments that gave symbolic meaning to their fortifications. The great walls and moats that protected cities like Tikal and Calakmul were not simply military installations but sacred boundaries that separated the ordered world of civilization from the chaos of the wilderness beyond. Maya armies were organized according to principles that reflected both practical military needs and religious concepts about the proper relationships between leaders and followers. At the apex of military hierarchy stood the Ahau or king, who served as both supreme commander and high priest of war. Below him were nobles who had proven their valor in previous campaigns and earned the right to lead smaller units of warriors. At the base of the military pyramid were common soldiers, often farmers and craftsmen, who took up arms during campaign seasons while continuing their civilian occupations during times of peace. The training of Maya warriors began in childhood with games and competitions that developed the physical skills and mental discipline required for combat. Young boys learned to use slings and spear throwers, practiced stalking and hiding techniques that would serve them in jungle warfare, and memorized the songs and stories that celebrated the achievements of great warriors from the past. The most promising youths were selected for advanced training that included instruction in leadership, tactics, and the religious protocols that governed military campaigns. Maya concepts of honorable warfare placed great emphasis on the capture of high-status prisoners rather than the simple killing of enemies. A warrior's prestige was measured not by the number of opponents he had killed, but by the rank and importance of the captives he had taken alive. This preference for capture over killing was rooted in religious beliefs about the spiritual value of sacrifice victims, as captured warriors were considered the most precious offerings that could be made to the gods who governed warfare and victory. The great rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul that dominated Maya politics for over 2 centuries illustrates the complex interplay between military conflict, diplomatic maneuvering, and economic competition that characterized classic period warfare. These two superpowers of the Maya world were separated by less than 100 miles of dense jungle, but their sphere of influence extended across much of the Maya lowlands as smaller cities allied themselves with one or the other of these dominant powers. Calakmul, known to its inhabitants as Khan, or the Snake Kingdom, was perhaps the largest city in the classic period Maya world, with a population that may have exceeded 100,000 people at its peak. The rulers of Calakmul claimed authority over a network of client cities that stretched from the Usumatsinta River to the Caribbean coast, extracting tribute and military service from subordinate rulers while providing them with protection from common enemies and access to extensive trade networks. Tikal, the great rival of Calakmul, controlled a different but equally extensive network of allied and subordinate cities that dominated the central Petén region of Guatemala. The rulers of Tikal claimed descent from ancient dynasties that had ruled in the region for centuries, and they portrayed their conflicts with Calakmul as struggles to preserve traditional Maya values against foreign innovations and influences. This propaganda was not entirely false, as Calakmul had extensive connections with central Mexican civilizations and incorporated foreign elements into their political and religious practices. The warfare between these great powers was not continuous, but followed cyclical patterns that reflected both practical considerations and religious beliefs about the proper timing of military activities. Campaigns were typically launched during the dry season, when travel through jungle paths was easier and when agricultural work was less demanding. The timing of specific battles was determined by astronomical calculations that identified periods when war gods were considered most likely to favor human warriors with victory. Maya military campaigns were elaborate affairs that required months of preparation and involved not just warriors but entire communities that provided logistical support for armies in the field. Specialists were needed to manufacture weapons and armor, prepare food supplies that could be carried on long marches, and conduct the religious ceremonies that ensured divine favor for military ventures. Women played crucial roles in these preparations, weaving the quilted cotton armor that protected warriors in battle and creating the elaborate costumes that transformed successful fighters into living representations of war gods. The capture of enemy rulers was the ultimate goal of Maya warfare, as these high-status prisoners could provide both valuable intelligence about enemy plans and prestigious victims for sacrificial ceremonies that demonstrated the victor's piety and power. When the armies of Calakmul succeeded in capturing the king of Tikal in 695 CE, they achieved one of the greatest military victories in Maya history, effectively ending Tikal's dominance in the central Petén region for over a century. The treatment of captured rulers reveals important aspects of Maya concepts about the relationship between warfare and religious practice. Captured kings were not immediately executed, but were kept alive for extended periods during which they participated in elaborate ceremonies that celebrated their captor's victory while preparing them for their eventual sacrifice. These ceremonies transformed military victories into religious festivals that reinforce the cosmic significance of earthly conflicts. Maya siege warfare developed sophisticated techniques for capturing heavily fortified cities without resorting to direct assaults that would result in enormous casualties. Maya armies could maintain sieges for months, cutting off enemy supply lines while conducting raids that prevented defenders from gathering food or obtaining military reinforcements. The psychological pressure of prolonged siege was often as effective as physical attacks in forcing enemy cities to surrender. The diplomatic aspects of Maya warfare were as important as the military campaigns themselves. Maya kings spent considerable effort building coalitions of allied cities that could provide military support during major conflicts while serving as buffers against enemy attacks. These alliances were maintained through marriages between royal families, exchanges of luxury goods, and joint participation in religious ceremonies that created bonds of mutual obligation between different rulers. Maya military intelligence networks were remarkably sophisticated, with rulers maintaining extensive spy networks that provided information about enemy military preparations, political developments, and economic conditions. Maya merchants who traveled regularly between cities served as ideal intelligence agents, as their commercial activities provided cover for gathering military information, while their knowledge of local conditions made them valuable sources of strategic intelligence. The fortification systems developed by Maya engineers represent some of the most impressive military architecture in the ancient Americas. The defensive walls that protected major cities like Tikal incorporated multiple lines of defense that could channel enemy attacks into predetermined killing zones while providing protected positions for defending archers and spear throwers. These fortifications were carefully integrated with natural terrain features like hills, rivers, and swamps that enhanced their defensive effectiveness. Maya naval warfare developed along the rivers and coastal areas where canoe-based forces could provide rapid transportation for troops and supplies while conducting raids against enemy settlements that lacked adequate defenses against waterborne attacks. The largest Maya war canoes could carry dozens of warriors and were equipped with platforms that allowed archers to fight effectively from moving vessels. Control of major rivers became crucial strategic objectives that could determine the outcome of entire military campaigns. The economic aspects of Maya warfare created complex relationships between military success and commercial prosperity. Victorious armies gained access to tribute payments from conquered cities, control over valuable trade routes, and opportunities to redirect commercial networks in ways that benefited their home territories. The wealth generated by successful warfare funded the construction of the great temples and palaces that served as monuments to military achievement while providing resources for future military campaigns. Maya concepts of just warfare were governed by religious beliefs about the cosmic struggles between order and chaos that required human participation to maintain universal harmony. Wars were not viewed as purely secular conflicts, but as earthly manifestations of supernatural battles between gods and demons. This religious framework provided justification for military campaigns while establishing moral boundaries that limited the acceptable conduct of warfare. The role of omens and divination in Maya military planning reveals the deep integration of religious practice with strategic thinking that characterized their approach to warfare. Maya rulers consulted elaborate divinatory systems before launching military campaigns, seeking guidance from gods about the likely outcomes of different strategic options. Dreams, astronomical observations, and ritual ceremonies all provided information that influenced military decision-making. The decline of classic period Maya civilization in many regions during the 8th and 9th centuries CE was closely connected to the intensification of warfare that characterized this period, as environmental pressures and economic difficulties increased competition between Maya cities. Traditional restraints on military conduct broke down, and conflicts became more destructive and less regulated by religious protocols. The archaeological evidence from this period shows increased fortification of settlements, abandonment of vulnerable rural areas, and signs of widespread destruction that suggest a breakdown of the political systems that had maintained relative stability for centuries. Despite the ultimate collapse of many classic period cities, the military traditions of the Maya continued to evolve in regions where civilization survived the transition to the post-classic period. Cities like Chichen Itza and Mayapan developed new forms of military organization that incorporated innovations learned from central Mexican civilizations while maintaining distinctively Maya approaches to warfare and conquest. Standing today in the ruins of Maya fortifications, where ancient walls still bear the scars of battles fought over a millennium ago, we can imagine the courage and determination of the warriors who defended these positions against overwhelming odds. The stones themselves seem to whisper stories of heroic last stands, desperate sieges, and the complex loyalties that bound Maya warriors to their kings and cities. These were not simply military installations, but sacred spaces where human valor served divine purposes, creating legacies of honor that continue to inspire admiration long after the last Maya warrior laid down his obsidian-tipped spear. In the gathering twilight of the 8th century CE, as the last rays of sunlight filter through the forest canopy above the great plaza of Tikal, something profound and mysterious is beginning to unfold across the Maya world. The massive pyramids that have dominated the landscape for centuries still rise majestically above the jungle, their limestone facades still gleaming white in the fading light, but the plazas below them are gradually emptying. The merchants who once filled these spaces with exotic goods from distant lands are visiting less frequently. The scribes who carved elaborate hieroglyphic texts celebrating royal achievements are putting down their tools. The farmers who provided food for urban populations are abandoning their terraced fields and returning to simpler ways of life in scattered forest settlements. This transformation, which archaeologists call the classic Maya collapse, was not a sudden catastrophe that struck the Maya world like a natural disaster, but a gradual process that unfolded over more than a century and affected different regions in different ways. In the southern lowlands of Guatemala and Belize, where Maya civilization had reached its greatest heights during the Classic period, the 8th and 9th centuries witnessed the abandonment of major cities, the cessation of monumental construction projects, and the disappearance of the complex political systems that had governed Maya society for over 6 centuries. Yet even as the great cities of the south fell silent, Maya civilization continued to flourish in other regions, adapting to changing conditions and developing new forms of social organization that would sustain Maya communities for centuries to come. In the northern Yucatan Peninsula, cities like Chichen Itza and later Mayapan became centers of reinvented Maya civilization that incorporated new influences while maintaining essential elements of traditional Maya culture. The transformation of Maya civilization was not an ending, but a metamorphosis, a painful but ultimately creative process that allowed Maya communities to survive and thrive in a changing world. Understanding the collapse requires us to appreciate the complex interconnections that had made Classic period Maya civilization possible. The great cities of the Classic period were not self-sufficient communities, but nodes in extensive networks of trade, tribute, and cultural exchange that connected hundreds of settlements across thousands of square miles. These networks had created unprecedented prosperity and cultural sophistication, but they had also created vulnerabilities that would become critical weaknesses when environmental and social pressures began to mount during the 8th century. Climate change played a crucial role in destabilizing Classic period Maya civilization, though its effects were complex and varied across the diverse environments of the Maya world. Paleoclimatic evidence from lake sediments, tree rings, and cave formations reveals that the 8th and 9th centuries were marked by severe droughts that lasted for decades and disrupted the agricultural systems that supported large urban populations. These droughts were not unprecedented in Maya history, but they occurred at a time when the population had grown to levels that made traditional coping strategies inadequate. The Maya had developed remarkable techniques for managing water resources in their tropical environment, creating elaborate systems of reservoirs, canals, and terraced fields that could support dense populations even during normal dry seasons. However, these systems were designed to cope with the typical patterns of wet and dry seasons that had characterized the region for centuries. when multi-decade droughts reduced rainfall to levels far below historical norms. Even the most sophisticated water management systems proved insufficient to maintain the agricultural productivity needed to feed large urban populations. The social consequences of agricultural failure were magnified by the political structures that had evolved during the Classic period. Maya cities had become increasingly dependent on tribute from surrounding rural areas and trade with distant communities to supplement their local food production. When agricultural yields declined, rural communities became less able to provide tribute to urban centers, while trade networks that had carried food and other essential resources between regions began to break down as communities focused on meeting their own survival needs. Warfare, which had always been a feature of Maya political life, intensified dramatically as competition for increasingly scarce resources grew more desperate. The traditional restraints that had limited the destructiveness of Maya conflicts began to break down as rulers faced existential threats to their kingdoms. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increased fortification of settlements, abandonment of vulnerable rural areas, and signs of violent destruction at many sites that had previously been centers of peaceful commercial and cultural activity. The breakdown of traditional political authority created cascading effects that accelerated the collapse of urban centers throughout the southern Maya lowlands. As kings lost the ability to provide security and prosperity for their subjects, the religious and ideological foundations of Maya kingship were called into question. The elaborate ceremonies that had legitimized royal authority became impossible to maintain when resources were needed for basic survival. The scribal traditions that had preserved Maya historical and astronomical knowledge began to disappear as the elite classes that had supported them fled or died. Environmental degradation compounded the effects of drought and political instability, creating feedback loops that made recovery increasingly difficult. Centuries of intensive agriculture and urban development had altered the natural landscape in ways that reduced its resilience to environmental stress. Deforestation around major cities had eliminated the forest cover that helped regulate local climate and retain soil moisture. The construction of extensive canal and drainage systems had altered natural water flow patterns in ways that made some areas more vulnerable to both flooding and drought. The abandonment of the great cities was not a sudden exodus, but a gradual process that unfolded over several generations. As conditions deteriorated, populations began to disperse from urban centers back to smaller, more sustainable rural communities, where traditional subsistence strategies could provide greater security than dependence on complex trade networks and tribute systems. This dispersal represented a rational adaptation to changing circumstances rather than a failure of Maya civilization. Archaeological evidence suggests that the final abandonment of major Classic period cities was often preceded by attempts to adapt to changing conditions through modifications of traditional practices. At some sites, monumental construction projects were scaled back or redirected toward more practical purposes like water storage and defense. Royal palaces were subdivided into smaller residential units that could house multiple families. Public spaces were converted to agricultural use as urban populations attempted to become more self-sufficient in food production. The collapse of Classic period political systems did not mean the disappearance of Maya culture or the abandonment of all Maya achievements. Many elements of Classic period civilization survived the transformation and continued to develop in new forms. Maya astronomical knowledge, mathematical concepts, and calendrical systems were preserved and transmitted to later generations. Artistic traditions continued to evolve, producing new styles that reflected changing cultural conditions while maintaining connections to ancient Maya aesthetic principles. Religious practices also showed remarkable continuity through the period of political transformation. While the elaborate state ceremonies of the Classic period could no longer be maintained, community-level religious observances continued to follow traditional patterns. Maya concepts about the relationship between human beings and natural forces remained fundamentally unchanged, providing spiritual resources that helped communities cope with the challenges of social and environmental upheaval. The northern Yucatan Peninsula became the center of Maya cultural revival during the post-Classic period, developing new forms of political and social organization that proved more resilient to environmental and political pressures than the highly centralized systems of the Classic period. Cities like Chichen Itza emerged as regional powers that controlled extensive trade networks while maintaining more flexible and adaptive forms of governance than their classic period predecessors. Chichen Itza represents a fascinating synthesis of traditional Maya culture with influences from central Mexican civilizations, creating a hybrid form of Mesoamerican culture that was both distinctively Maya and cosmopolitan in its incorporation of foreign elements. The architecture of Chichen Itza combines classic Maya features like corbelled vaulting and astronomical alignments with central Mexican innovations like colonnaded halls and warrior imagery. This cultural synthesis created new possibilities for Maya civilization while maintaining essential continuities with ancient traditions. The political organization of post-classic Maya cities differed significantly from classic period patterns, emphasizing collective leadership and council-based decision-making rather than the absolute authority of divine kings. This shift toward more democratic forms of governance may have been a response to the failure of highly centralized political systems during the classic period collapse. The new political structures proved more flexible and adaptive to changing conditions while maintaining the cultural identity and social cohesion that defined Maya communities. Economic strategies also evolved during the post-classic period, with greater emphasis on maritime trade and diversified production systems that were less vulnerable to environmental disruptions than the intensive agricultural systems of the classic period. Maya merchants developed extensive trading networks that connected the Yucatan Peninsula with communities throughout Mesoamerica and possibly even South America, creating new sources of wealth and cultural exchange that compensated for the loss of traditional tribute systems. The survival strategies developed by Maya communities during the transformation period provide valuable insights into the resilience and adaptability of human societies facing environmental and social challenges. Maya communities that successfully navigated the collapse period were those that maintained strong social cohesion, preserved essential cultural knowledge, and developed flexible strategies for adapting to changing conditions while maintaining their fundamental identity and values. The dispersal of population from urban centers to smaller, more sustainable communities represented a return to earlier patterns of Maya settlement that had proven successful for centuries before the emergence of large cities. These smaller communities were less vulnerable to environmental disruptions and political instability while maintaining the cultural practices and social relationships that defined Maya identity. The success of this adaptation strategy is demonstrated by the fact that Maya communities continued to thrive in many areas throughout the post-classic period and beyond. Agricultural strategies also evolved during the transformation period, with greater emphasis on diverse cropping systems and forest management techniques that were more sustainable than the intensive agriculture that had supported classic period urban centers. Maya farmers rediscovered traditional techniques for managing forest resources while developing new approaches to soil conservation and water management that proved more resilient to environmental fluctuations. The intellectual achievements of classic period Maya civilization were not lost during the transformation, but were preserved and transmitted through new channels that proved more durable than the elite scribal traditions of royal courts. Community-based educational systems maintained knowledge of Maya calendrical systems, astronomical observations, and mathematical concepts. Oral traditions preserved historical narratives and mythological knowledge that had previously been recorded in hieroglyphic texts. These alternative preservation strategies ensured that essential elements of Maya intellectual culture survived the collapse of the political systems that had originally supported them. Standing today in the ruins of abandoned classic period cities, surrounded by the forest that has reclaimed these once magnificent urban centers, we can appreciate both the tragedy and the wisdom of the Maya transformation. The great pyramids and palaces that remain testify to the remarkable achievements of classic period civilization, while the thriving Maya communities that continue to inhabit these regions demonstrate the enduring vitality of Maya culture. The collapse was not an ending, but a metamorphosis, a painful but ultimately creative process that allowed Maya civilization to reinvent itself and continue to flourish in new forms that proved more sustainable and resilient than their classic period predecessors. In the smoky dawn of July 12, 1542, Spanish conquistador Francisco de Montejo the Younger stands atop the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, surveying a landscape that stretches endlessly toward horizons lost in morning haze. Around him lie the remnants of what his chroniclers will describe as one of the greatest cities they have ever seen, its plazas still echoing with the footsteps of Maya merchants and pilgrims who had gathered here for ceremonies that connected earthly affairs with cosmic rhythms. Yet for all its grandeur, Chichen Itza has been abandoned for over 2 centuries, a ghost city that testifies to both the achievements and the transformations that have shaped Maya civilization. The Spanish conquest of the Maya world was neither swift nor complete, unfolding over more than a century and meeting resistance that would test the limits of European military technology and colonial administration. Unlike the dramatic conquests of the Aztec and Inca empires, where the capture of central capitals led to the rapid collapse of entire political systems, the conquest of the Maya required separate campaigns against dozens of independent kingdoms scattered across difficult terrain that favored defenders familiar with local conditions. When Spanish expeditions first reached Maya territory in the early 1500s, they encountered not a unified empire, but a complex mosaic of competing city-states, each with its own rulers, traditions, and political alliances. This political fragmentation, which had characterized Maya civilization for centuries, proved both a weakness and a strength in confronting European invasion. While the lack of central authority made coordinated resistance impossible, it also meant that the conquest of one Maya kingdom did not automatically lead to the submission of others. The first Spanish encounters with Maya civilization occurred along the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, where shipwrecked sailors and failed expeditions had already provided Maya communities with glimpses of European technology and intentions. The Maya proved remarkably adaptable in learning to use Spanish weapons and tactics against their former owners, while their knowledge of local geography and climate gave them significant advantages in prolonged conflicts with European invaders unfamiliar with tropical warfare. The conquest campaigns revealed both the strengths and limitations of Spanish military technology when confronted with determined resistance in challenging environments. Spanish steel weapons and firearms provided significant advantages in open battles, but Maya warriors quickly learned to avoid direct confrontations that played to Spanish strengths. Instead, they developed guerrilla tactics that exploited their intimate knowledge of forest paths, seasonal weather patterns, and the psychological effects of fighting in an environment that many Europeans found terrifying and disorienting. Maya military resistance was often led by traditional rulers who understood that Spanish conquest meant not just political submission but the destruction of the religious and cultural systems that had governed Maya life for centuries. These leaders mobilized their subjects not just as soldiers but as defenders of a way of life that was fundamentally incompatible with European colonial institutions. The intensity of Maya resistance reflected their understanding that this was not merely another political conflict but a struggle for cultural survival. The siege of Mayapan in 1546 demonstrated both the sophistication of Maya military tactics and the determination of Spanish conquistadors to establish permanent control over Maya territory. The city's defenders used elaborate defensive systems that incorporated both traditional Maya fortification techniques and innovations learned from observing Spanish siege warfare. The siege lasted for months, becoming a test of endurance that cost both sides enormous casualties before Spanish forces finally breached the city's defenses. Perhaps no episode better illustrates the complexity of the Maya conquest than the long resistance of the Itza kingdom centered on the island city of Tayasal in Lake Petén Itzá. This Maya stronghold maintained its independence for over 150 years after the initial Spanish invasion, becoming a refuge for Maya communities fleeing colonial rule in other regions. The Itza kingdom preserved traditional Maya political and religious institutions while adapting to changing circumstances by developing new forms of diplomatic and military organization. The final conquest of Tayasal in 1697 marked the end of independent Maya political authority, but it also demonstrated the remarkable resilience and adaptability of Maya civilization. The Itza had maintained sophisticated urban civilization, conducted long-distance trade with other Maya communities, and preserved literary and astronomical traditions that connected them with the great achievements of their classic period ancestors. Their eventual surrender came not from military defeat, but from the recognition that continued resistance would lead to the destruction of the cultural institutions they were fighting to preserve. Spanish colonial administration faced unprecedented challenges in attempting to govern Maya communities that had developed complex systems of local autonomy over many centuries. The encomienda system, which had been successfully imposed in other parts of the Spanish Empire, proved difficult to implement in Maya regions where traditional authorities maintained strong legitimacy and where geographical conditions made direct Spanish control problematic. Colonial administrators found themselves forced to work through existing Maya leadership structures while gradually introducing European legal and religious institutions. The Catholic Church played a crucial role in Spanish efforts to transform Maya society, but missionary activities produced results that were far more complex than simple conversion from indigenous religion to European Christianity. Maya communities proved remarkably skilled at adapting Catholic symbols and rituals to express traditional religious concepts, creating syncretic forms of spiritual practice that preserved essential elements of ancient Maya religion within apparently Christian frameworks. The destruction of Maya books represents one of the greatest cultural tragedies of the colonial period, eliminating most of the written records that had preserved Maya historical, astronomical, and religious knowledge for over a millennium. Bishop Diego de Landa's notorious auto da fe in the town of Mani in 1562 resulted in the burning of 27 Maya codices, effectively destroying most of the surviving literature of one of the world's great civilizations. De Landa justified this destruction as necessary for eliminating pagan superstitions, but his actions eliminated irreplaceable records of human intellectual achievement. Ironically, the same Diego de Landa who destroyed so many Maya books also wrote one of our most important sources of information about Maya culture and society. His Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, written years after his destructive campaigns, preserves detailed descriptions of Maya religious practices, social organization, and historical traditions that would otherwise have been lost forever. This document reveals the complexity of Spanish attitudes toward Maya civilization, combining genuine intellectual curiosity with religious zealotry and cultural chauvinism. Maya scribes and intellectuals responded to the destruction of their traditional books by developing new strategies for preserving essential cultural knowledge. In highland Guatemala, Maya authors created new texts like the Popol Vuh that used the Roman alphabet to record traditional stories and historical narratives in Maya languages. These colonial period texts blended ancient Maya traditions with European literary conventions, creating hybrid works that preserved essential elements of Maya culture while adapting to changed political circumstances. The books of Chilam Balam, produced in various Maya communities throughout the colonial period, represent another remarkable attempt to preserve traditional knowledge while adapting to European cultural influences. These texts combined Maya prophetic traditions with Christian apocalyptic literature, creating complex works that served both as repositories of ancient wisdom and as guides for navigating the challenges of colonial rule. The authors of these books demonstrated remarkable intellectual flexibility in finding ways to maintain Maya cultural identity within the constraints of Spanish colonial society. Language preservation became a crucial battleground in the struggle to maintain Maya cultural identity under colonial rule. Spanish authorities initially encouraged the use of Maya languages for missionary work, recognizing that religious conversion required communication in languages that indigenous communities could understand. However, this policy also created opportunities for Maya intellectuals to preserve and develop their linguistic traditions while appearing to cooperate with colonial authorities. Maya communities developed sophisticated strategies for maintaining traditional agricultural and ecological practices despite Spanish efforts to impose European farming techniques and land use patterns. The milpa system of forest agriculture, which had sustained Maya communities for centuries, proved remarkably adaptable to colonial conditions while preserving essential elements of Maya environmental knowledge. These agricultural practices maintained the close relationship between Maya communities and their natural environment that was fundamental to traditional Maya worldview. The colonial period also witnessed the emergence of new forms of Maya artistic expression that blended traditional techniques with European influences. Maya craftsmen learned to work with new materials and tools introduced by Spanish colonists while maintaining the aesthetic principles and symbolic systems that had characterized Maya art for centuries. Colonial period textiles, pottery, and architectural decoration demonstrate the remarkable creativity of Maya artists in adapting to changed circumstances while preserving essential elements of their cultural heritage. Economic exploitation under Spanish colonial rule transformed Maya society in fundamental ways, but Maya communities proved remarkably resourceful in developing survival strategies that preserved essential social institutions while adapting to new economic realities. The tribute system imposed by colonial authorities placed enormous burdens on Maya communities, but traditional reciprocity networks and collective labor practices helped distribute these burdens while maintaining social cohesion. The encomienda system granted Spanish colonists the right to extract labor and tribute from Maya communities in exchange for providing protection and religious instruction. In practice, this system often amounted to barely disguised slavery that placed impossible demands on Maya communities while providing few benefits in return. Maya communities responded by developing various forms of resistance that ranged from open rebellion to subtle forms of non-cooperation that undermined colonial authority without provoking violent retaliation. Disease epidemics brought by European contact devastated Maya populations throughout the colonial period, creating demographic catastrophes that disrupted traditional social organization and forced surviving communities to develop new adaptive strategies. Smallpox, measles, and other infectious diseases to which Maya populations had no immunity killed enormous numbers of people, sometimes eliminating entire communities and forcing survivors to reorganize their societies around drastically reduced populations. Despite these enormous challenges, Maya communities demonstrated remarkable resilience in maintaining cultural continuity through the colonial period. Traditional calendrical knowledge was preserved through oral tradition and carefully hidden written records. Religious ceremonies continued to be conducted in modified forms that satisfied Spanish authorities while preserving essential spiritual practices. Kinship systems and community organization adapted to new circumstances while maintaining the social bonds that defined Maya identity. The gradual emergence of mestizo populations created new forms of cultural identity that blended Maya, Spanish, and sometimes African influences. These mixed communities developed their own traditions that preserved elements of Maya culture while adapting to the social realities of colonial society. The cultural creativity of mestizo communities contributed to the preservation and transformation of Maya traditions in ways that ensured their survival into the modern period. Maya intellectual traditions showed remarkable adaptability during the colonial period, finding new expressions that preserved essential knowledge while conforming to Spanish religious and political requirements. Traditional astronomical knowledge was maintained through observation of agricultural cycles and religious festivals. Mathematical concepts were preserved through architectural practices and craft traditions. Historical narratives were adapted to emphasize themes that were acceptable to colonial authorities while preserving essential information about Maya heritage. The end of the colonial period in the early 1800s brought new challenges and opportunities for Maya communities as newly independent nations attempted to create modern political institutions while dealing with the legacy of centuries of colonial rule. Maya communities found themselves caught between traditional authorities who had learned to work within colonial structures and new national governments that often had little understanding of or sympathy for indigenous cultural traditions. Standing today in colonial churches built on the foundations of Maya temples, where Catholic saints wear expressions that seem mysteriously familiar, and where incense smoke carries prayers in languages that predate European contact by millennia, we can appreciate the remarkable cultural synthesis that emerged from the collision between Maya and Spanish civilizations. The colonial period was a time of enormous suffering and loss for Maya communities, but it was also a period of creative adaptation that ensured the survival of essential elements of one of humanity's great cultural traditions. The Maya who emerged from the colonial experience were not the same people who had greeted the first Spanish expeditions, but they remained unmistakably Maya, carrying forward ancient traditions while embracing new possibilities for cultural expression and social organization. In the suffocating humidity of a Guatemalan jungle morning in 1839, American explorer John Lloyd Stephens pushes through curtains of vines and emerges into a clearing where limestone pyramids rise like green hills toward the canopy above. Beside him, British artist Frederick Catherwood sets up his camera lucida, preparing to create the first accurate drawings of Maya ruins that will astonish the civilized world. Neither man fully comprehends what they have discovered among the roots and shadows of Copan, but their careful documentation will begin a process of rediscovery that continues to reveal new wonders about Maya civilization more than a century and a half later. The rediscovery of the Maya world began in earnest during the 19th century, when European and American explorers penetrated jungle regions that had been largely ignored by colonial authorities more interested in extracting wealth than preserving ancient monuments. These early expeditions were often motivated by romantic notions about lost civilizations and the possibility of finding treasure, but they produced the first systematic documentation of Maya archaeological sites that had been hidden beneath forest growth for centuries. Stephens and Catherwood's expeditions to Central America between 1839 and 1842 marked a turning point in Western understanding of Maya civilization. Their meticulous documentation of sites like Copan, Palenque, and Uxmal provided the first accurate visual records of Maya architecture and sculpture, while Stephens' vivid prose descriptions captured the imagination of readers who had never conceived that such sophisticated civilizations had existed in the Americas before European contact. The work of these early explorers was hampered by enormous practical difficulties that reveal the dedication required to conduct archaeological research in tropical environments. Reaching Maya sites required journeys through roadless jungle where travelers faced dangers from wild animals, disease-carrying insects, poisonous snakes, and occasionally hostile local populations who viewed foreign intrusions with suspicion. The heat and humidity of the tropical climate made physical labor exhausting while creating conditions that rapidly destroyed photographic equipment and paper records. Despite these challenges, 19th century explorers gradually mapped the extent of Maya civilization, revealing a cultural area that encompassed parts of 5 modern nations and included hundreds of archaeological sites, ranging from modest farming villages to vast urban centers that had once housed tens of thousands of inhabitants. Each new discovery expanded understanding of the geographical scope and cultural complexity of Maya civilization, while raising new questions about how such an advanced society had developed in seemingly hostile jungle environments. The decipherment of Maya hieroglyphic writing represented one of the greatest intellectual achievements in the history of archaeology, requiring the combined efforts of scholars from many different disciplines over more than a century. Early attempts to read Maya glyphs were hampered by false assumptions about the nature of the writing system and by the limited number of texts available for study. Many scholars assumed that Maya hieroglyphs were purely ideographic, representing concepts rather than sounds, making it impossible to use the phonetic principles that had proven successful in deciphering other ancient scripts. The breakthrough in Maya decipherment began in the 1950s and 60s with the work of scholars like Yuri Knorosov, Tatiana Proskuryakov, and Heinrich Berlin, who demonstrated that Maya inscriptions recorded historical events rather than purely religious or astronomical information. Knorosov's recognition that many Maya glyphs represented syllabic sounds rather than complete words provided the key to unlocking the phonetic structure of Maya writing, while Proskuryakov's identification of historical narratives in Maya texts revealed that the inscriptions preserved detailed records of royal dynasties and political events. The collaborative nature of Maya decipherment reflected the international scope of scholarly interest in Maya civilization and the complexity of the intellectual challenges involved in understanding this ancient writing system. Scholars from the United States, Russia, Germany, Guatemala, Mexico, and many other countries contributed crucial insights that advanced the decipherment process. Regular workshops and conferences became forums for sharing new discoveries and testing interpretive theories, creating a community of scholars united by their fascination with Maya intellectual achievements. The development of new archaeological techniques during the 20th century revolutionized understanding of Maya civilization by revealing aspects of ancient life that were invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Radiocarbon dating allowed archaeologists to establish precise chronologies for Maya cultural development, while improved excavation methods provided detailed information about daily life in ancient Maya communities. Aerial photography revealed the extent of Maya urban planning and agricultural systems, while underwater archaeology in cenotes and caves uncovered evidence of Maya religious practices. The application of scientific analysis to Maya artifacts and monuments yielded unexpected insights into ancient Maya technology and social organization. Chemical analysis of Maya pottery revealed trade networks that connected communities separated by hundreds of miles, while examination of human skeletal remains provided information about Maya diet, health, and social stratification. Study of ancient pollen and other environmental indicators revealed how Maya agricultural practices had modified tropical ecosystems over thousands of years. The discovery and excavation of royal tombs provided unprecedented insights into Maya concepts of kingship and the afterlife, while revealing the extraordinary artistic achievements of Maya craftsmen. The tomb of Pakal the Great at Palenque, discovered in 1952, contained jade ornaments and carved monuments that demonstrated the sophisticated symbolism and technical skill of Maya artists. Similar discoveries at sites like Copan, Tikal, and Calakmul revealed the wealth and power of Maya rulers while providing crucial information about Maya religious beliefs and political organization. The use of LiDAR technology in recent decades has revolutionized Maya archaeology by revealing the true extent of ancient Maya urban centers and their surrounding agricultural systems. This laser-based mapping technique can penetrate jungle canopy to create detailed images of ground surfaces, revealing archaeological features that would be impossible to detect through traditional survey methods. LiDAR surveys have revealed that Maya cities were far larger and more densely populated than previously imagined, while their agricultural systems were more extensive and sophisticated than scholars had believed possible. The revelation that Maya civilization supported much larger populations than previously estimated has forced archaeologists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about ancient Maya society and its relationship with the tropical environment. The discovery of extensive networks of canals, terraces, and raised fields has demonstrated that Maya farmers developed sustainable agricultural techniques that could support dense urban populations while maintaining ecological balance over many centuries. Modern excavations at major Maya sites continue to yield new discoveries that challenge and refine scholarly understanding of ancient Maya civilization. Recent work at sites like El Mirador has revealed that Maya urban civilization began much earlier than previously thought, while excavations at Caracol and other sites have provided new information about Maya warfare, trade, and political organization. Each new discovery adds pieces to the complex puzzle of Maya cultural development, while raising new questions that will require years of additional research to answer. The preservation of Maya archaeological sites presents ongoing challenges that require international cooperation and sophisticated conservation techniques. Many important Maya sites are located in remote areas where they face threats from looting, environmental degradation, and encroaching development. The humid tropical climate that helped preserve these sites for centuries also creates conditions that can rapidly damage exposed monuments and artifacts if proper conservation measures are not implemented. The development of community-based archaeology programs has created new opportunities for involving descendant Maya populations in the study and preservation of their ancestral heritage. These programs recognize that modern Maya communities possess valuable traditional knowledge about their history and environment while providing economic incentives for local participation in archaeological research and site protection. The collaboration between professional archaeologists and Maya communities has enriched understanding of ancient Maya culture while ensuring that research benefits descendant populations. The application of new technologies to Maya archaeological research continues to yield surprising discoveries that expand understanding of ancient Maya achievements. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed hidden chambers in Maya pyramids, while advanced dating techniques have refined chronologies of Maya cultural development. Computer modeling of ancient Maya agricultural systems has demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of water management and soil conservation, while analysis of ancient DNA has provided new insights into Maya population movements and genetic relationships. The study of Maya astronomical knowledge has revealed the remarkable precision of ancient Maya observations and calculations. Modern astronomers working with Maya calendar specialists have demonstrated that Maya predictions of astronomical events were often more accurate than those of contemporary European scholars. The recognition of Maya achievements in mathematics and astronomy has led to increased appreciation of indigenous intellectual traditions and their contributions to human knowledge. The revival of Maya languages and cultural traditions in modern Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize has created new opportunities for understanding ancient Maya civilization through the perspectives of descendant communities. Maya linguists and cultural specialists are making crucial contributions to the interpretation of ancient texts and the understanding of cultural practices that have continuity from ancient times to the present. This collaboration between academic researchers and Maya cultural specialists is producing more nuanced and culturally sensitive interpretations of ancient Maya achievements. The development of Maya cultural tourism has created economic opportunities for modern Maya communities while raising awareness of ancient Maya achievements among international audiences. Well-managed cultural tourism programs provide funding for site preservation and community development while ensuring that Maya communities benefit from increased interest in their ancestral heritage. However, the growth of tourism also creates challenges related to site protection and the need to balance visitor access with conservation requirements. The ongoing documentation and interpretation of Maya art and iconography continues to reveal new aspects of ancient Maya worldview and cultural expression. The recognition that Maya art was not merely decorative but served as a complex system of visual communication has led to more sophisticated analysis of Maya artistic achievements. The integration of art historical analysis with archaeological and textual evidence is producing more complete understanding of Maya cultural expression and its role in ancient Maya society. The digital preservation of Maya archaeological sites and artifacts is creating permanent records that will be available to future generations of researchers and descendant communities. High-resolution photography, three-dimensional scanning, and virtual reality technologies are documenting Maya monuments and artifacts in unprecedented detail while making this information accessible to global audiences. These digital archives are becoming increasingly important as original sites and artifacts face ongoing threats from environmental degradation and human activities. Standing today in the restored plazas of sites like Tikal and Chichen Itza, watching sunrise light illuminate limestone facades that still bear traces of ancient paint, we can appreciate both how far our understanding of Maya civilization has advanced and how much remains to be discovered. The jungle still conceals countless sites that await exploration, while new technologies continue to reveal hidden aspects of sites that have been studied for generations. The rediscovery of the Maya world is an ongoing process that promises to yield new insights and surprises for generations to come. The transformation of Maya studies from 19th century treasure hunting to modern scientific archaeology reflects broader changes in how scholars approach the study of ancient civilizations. The recognition that Maya civilization represents one of humanity's great cultural achievements has led to increased respect for indigenous intellectual traditions and greater emphasis on collaborative research that involves descendant communities. The rediscovery of the Maya world has become not just an academic pursuit, but a process of cultural reclamation that is enriching our understanding of human creativity and resilience. In the golden light of sunrise breaking over the pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza, as shadows slowly retreat from limestone steps worn smooth by countless feet over more than 1,000 years, we reach the end of our journey through the lost world of the Maya. But perhaps lost is not the right word, for as the morning light reveals the continuing beauty of these ancient monuments, it also illuminates a profound truth. The Maya world was never truly lost at all. Today, more than 6 million people throughout Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador continue to speak Maya languages, tend Maya cornfields, and honor traditions that connect them directly to the builders of Tikal and Palenque, in highland villages where women still weave patterns that tell ancient stories, in forest communities where farmers still plant according to calendars that track the movements of Venus, in ceremonies where copal incense still carries prayers to gods whose names echo through millennia. The Maya world lives on. The threads of continuity that connect modern Maya communities to their ancient heritage are both visible and invisible, woven into daily practices that might seem ordinary to casual observers but that carry profound meanings for those who understand their cultural significance. When a Maya farmer in Guatemala plants corn at the beginning of the rainy season, he is participating in a ritual relationship with the natural world that his ancestors formalized over 4,000 years ago. When a Maya weaver in Chiapas creates a textile that incorporates traditional colors and patterns, she is preserving artistic traditions that can be traced back to paintings on classic period pottery. The languages spoken by modern Maya communities represent living connections to intellectual traditions that produced some of humanity's greatest achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and writing. Maya linguists working today are not just preserving ancient vocabularies, but maintaining conceptual frameworks that embody unique ways of understanding time, space, and the relationship between human beings and the natural world. These languages contain within their structures the wisdom of countless generations who observed the sky, mapped the forest, and developed sustainable ways of living in harmony with tropical environments. The revival of Maya cultural traditions in recent decades has created new opportunities for young Maya people to connect with their heritage while participating in the modern world. Maya schools throughout the region now teach children to read and write in their ancestral languages, while also preparing them for success in national and international contexts. This bilingual and bicultural education helps ensure that ancient knowledge will be transmitted to future generations, while equipping young people with the skills they need to thrive in contemporary society. Maya artists and intellectuals are creating new forms of cultural expression that blend traditional themes with contemporary techniques and concerns. Maya writers are producing literature in indigenous languages that addresses modern social issues while drawing on ancient mythological traditions. Maya artists are developing new visual vocabularies that incorporate traditional iconographic elements with contemporary artistic innovations. This creative synthesis demonstrates the continuing vitality of Maya culture and its capacity for growth and adaptation. The archaeological exploration of Maya sites continues to yield new discoveries that surprise and humble even the most experienced researchers. Recent LiDAR surveys have revealed that ancient Maya cities were far larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined, with urban areas that extended for dozens of square miles and supported populations that may have reached into the hundreds of thousands. These discoveries are forcing scholars to completely reconsider their understanding of ancient Maya social organization, agricultural systems, and environmental management techniques. The revelation that Maya civilization developed sustainable technologies for managing tropical forest environments has attracted increasing attention from modern researchers concerned about climate change and environmental degradation. Ancient Maya techniques for water management, soil conservation, and forest agriculture are being studied as potential models for contemporary development projects in tropical regions around the world. The wisdom embedded in traditional Maya environmental practices offers hope for creating more sustainable relationships between human societies and natural ecosystems. The preservation of Maya archaeological sites remains an ongoing challenge that requires international cooperation and significant financial resources. Many important sites are located in remote areas where they face threats from looting, environmental degradation, and encroaching development. The creation of archaeological parks and UNESCO World Heritage designations has helped protect some sites, but the sheer number and geographical extent of Maya archaeological resources makes comprehensive preservation a daunting task. Community-based conservation programs are proving increasingly important for protecting Maya heritage while providing economic opportunities for local populations. When Maya communities are given authority and resources to manage archaeological sites in their territories, They often prove to be the most effective guardians of these ancient monuments. Their intimate knowledge of local conditions and their cultural connections to these sites make them natural stewards of their ancestral heritage. The growth of cultural tourism has created new opportunities and challenges for Maya communities and their archaeological heritage. Well-managed tourism can provide economic benefits that help support site preservation and community development, but uncontrolled tourism can damage fragile archaeological remains and disrupt traditional ways of life. Finding the right balance between access and preservation requires careful planning and ongoing dialogue between tourism developers, archaeological professionals, and local communities. The digitization of Maya cultural heritage is creating new possibilities for sharing ancient Maya achievements with global audiences while preserving this knowledge for future generations. Virtual reality tours of Maya sites allow people around the world to experience these monuments without contributing to the physical wear and tear that threatens actual sites. Digital archives of Maya manuscripts and inscriptions are making these precious documents accessible to researchers and descendant communities while reducing the need to handle fragile originals. Modern Maya political movements are drawing inspiration from ancient Maya concepts of governance and community organization as they work to secure greater autonomy and cultural rights within contemporary nation-states. Maya political leaders are demonstrating that traditional forms of consensus-based decision-making and collective resource management can provide effective alternatives to European-derived political institutions. These movements are helping to ensure that Maya voices are heard in national and international forums where decisions affecting Maya communities are made. The study of ancient Maya science and mathematics continues to reveal achievements that challenge Western assumptions about the development of human knowledge. Maya astronomers developed calendar systems that were more accurate than those used in Europe during the same periods. Maya mathematicians independently invented the concept of zero and developed sophisticated techniques for calculating with very large numbers. Maya physicians developed medical treatments that are still used by traditional healers throughout Mesoamerica. The recognition of Maya intellectual achievements has contributed to growing awareness of the diversity of human approaches to understanding the natural world. Maya ways of categorizing plants and animals, measuring time, and conceptualizing space offer alternatives to European scientific traditions that dominated global education for centuries. This intellectual diversity is increasingly recognized as a valuable resource for addressing contemporary challenges that require innovative thinking and creative problem-solving. As we stand in the growing light of this new day, watching the sun rise over monuments that have witnessed the passage of more than 50 generations, we can appreciate the remarkable continuity that connects ancient Maya achievements with contemporary Maya communities. The pyramid builders and the astronomers, the scribes and the merchants, the kings and the farmers who created Maya civilization live on in the languages, traditions, and knowledge systems that continue to flourish throughout the Maya world. The story of the Maya is not a tale of a vanished civilization preserved only in stone monuments and museum displays, but a living narrative that continues to unfold in the daily lives of millions of people who carry forward ancient traditions while embracing new possibilities. The Maya world was never lost because it was never abandoned by the people who created it and who continue to find meaning and inspiration in its enduring wisdom. In the laughter of Maya children playing in the shadows of ancient pyramids, in the songs of Maya women weaving stories into brilliant textiles, in the voices of Maya farmers calling to each other across cornfields planted according to calendars that have guided agricultural work for millennia, we hear the echoes of an unbroken tradition that connects the present moment to achievements that will continue to inspire wonder and admiration for generations yet to come. The Maya world lives on, as vital and creative today as it was when the first scribes painted glyphs on bark paper or the first astronomers climbed pyramid steps to greet the morning star.